Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the online PPE webinar. This is another webinar jointly hosted by all the NGBs, ABC, BMC, Mountaineering Ireland, Mountaineering Scotland, and today we are joined by Lion Equipment and a special guest from, can you guess what climbing wall? Not so subtle hint in the background there. I am Robert Mackenzie. I am going to be your host today. I'm from Mountaineering Scotland. I will be handing over to our panelists in a little bit to run the panels, do our presentations. They have some amazing information for you guys, so I hope you all enjoy it. I hope you all get a lot out of it. I will be back a little bit later on after each presentation for the question and answer section as well. So don't worry, you're not going to miss me too much. I'll still be here. Let's go through our little schedule for the day, shall we? So, there we go. So, schedule for the day, we'll do a little introduction. I'll introduce all of our panelists and everybody that's going to be joining us for the question and answer. And then session one is going to be a session from Lion Equipment specialists on some really in-depth, good information on PPE. Once our special guest, Mark, has finished that presentation, we are going to have a good question and answer section. So any questions, please use the question and answer function. We'll then go away for a break for half an hour. We'll come back at 12 o'clock, bang on the dot, 12 o'clock for the session two hosted by Dan from the BMC, who's going to talk about safety management of customers and their equipment. Followed by yet another question and answer section. So you will get lots of opportunities to ask your questions. We'll try and go through as many answers as possible. So who are our panelists? Who are our guests today? So for the question and answer section later on, I will be back for that. But we are also going to be joined by the wonderful special guest, Kate Phillips from the Lakelands Climbing Centre. Manager and finance director of Lakelands Climbing Centre, but the Climbing Centre is also now part of a huge chain of walls across England as well. So Kate is a very, very busy lady. She has loads of experience, hands-on experience working in climbing walls and actually putting all of this knowledge into practice. So loads of great information hopefully coming from her later on. This is the kind of person that you can ask how to do things practically. We're also joined by Scott Haslam from the ABC. He is going to be here, and the head honcho, the big man himself, John O'Capper from Lion Equipment, is going to be joining us for the question and answer section. Our panelists today, we have Dan Middleton from the BMC. In Dan's younger days, he worked as an instructor, floor walker in climbing walls. He helped build some climbing walls as well, but he is now the technical officer for the BMC. He and his team work on the standards for climbing equipment and provide advice to general public partners on PPE for climbing walls and for climbing. He also helps manage the BMC's incident and near miss reporting system, which I hope that we all use at some point. Well, no, I hope that we don't all have to use that at some point. But if we do have an incident, I hope you all know where to find that, and Dan will be keeping an eye on that. But he also used to work for Lion Equipment back in the day, back in their testing lab, which means that he has some experience genuinely breaking kit, which is really good to see. Huge amount of experience from Dan here. So yeah, feel free to ask really in-depth questions. For our first panel this morning, we are joined by Mark Croxall. Hopefully we all know who Lion Equipment are. Hopefully that's not a mystery to any of you. They are a leader in quality safety equipment for climbing, mountaineering, water sports, caving, cycling, ropes access, rescues at height, all the big things. They've got kit for everything. So I hope we all know who Lion Equipment are. But Mark is now sales rep for Lion Equipment. He's also been a senior instructor for outdoor education. He's a route setter. He's worked in climbing walls. He's also a keen mountain biker and has over 3 decades of climbing experience. I know he doesn't look it with the baby face, but 3 decades of climbing experience. And back in the day competing on the British bouldering team for around 15 years. So this guy's hardcore. So lots and lots of experience on this panel today. Really big names. It's great to see you all here. Thank you all for joining us. Like I said, these are some big names. They know lots of stuff. If you have questions, the question and answer function is there for you on the Zoom. I will be keeping track of all of your questions that come in. And during the question and answer section, I'll be asking our amazing panelists all the questions that you guys have. These guys have loads of experience, so please don't hold back. At any point, if you've got any in-depth, super technical questions, go for it, test them. The chat function's there as well, but if you've got questions, please use the question and answer function, and we'll try and get through as much as we can. We don't have loads of time for the questions and answers, unfortunately. We've only got a short amount of time, so we might not be able to get through all of your questions, but that is okay. I'm keeping track of all of them, and in the coming weeks, I'll put together all of the questions, get them all answered, and we will be sending them out to you guys a little bit later on. We're also recording this webinar, and it will be up on YouTube, and the link will be sent out to all of you as well. So if you miss anything and you need to catch up, or your question doesn't get answered and you need the question answered, you want answers to it, we will get all of that information to you after this. There's Scott there. He will be the one sending you out all of the information and all of the links afterwards. There is also going to be a poll in the middle of this. During Dan's presentation, there's going to be a poll. I'll set that live when Dan gives me the shout, and it's just a quick yes or no answer, quick hit. So please all take part in that. At any point, questions and answers, throw them at me. You answer the poll when it comes up. Be as interactive as possible. That would be amazing. It's great to hear from you guys. We love to know your thoughts, and share your own, ideas and experience as well. Please do that. Cool. I am going to be handed over to Mark. I think it's time to kick this off. Are we ready, Mark?
Yep. Yeah. Good stuff.
Excellent. So I'll hand over to Mark Croxall from Lion Equipment for the first presentation this morning. We are all going to be back for the question and answer afterwards. During Mark's presentation, if you've got questions, please fire them in the question and answer. Don't be shy. And we'll all see you a little bit later on for the question and answers. Cool. Thank you very much. Mark, take it away, buddy. If everybody else could hide their screens. There we go. Cool. Right, I'm going to leave you all with Mark. Enjoy. I'll see you back for the question and answer later on.
Cool. So good morning. What we're going to go through today is, well, in 45 minutes, or try to, a lot of the stuff that we cover in our 4-day competent person course on PPE inspection, and our 1-day user checks course. So first of all, what is PPE? So personal protective equipment, to just give you the European definition of it. So that's any device or appliance designed to be worn or held by an individual for protection against one or more health and safety hazards. Basically, if you're unsure whether your equipment is classed as PPE, the easiest way is just to read the manufacturer's instructions. And I'll probably refer to this quite a few times today, because it's the best place to look for pretty much anything, is always the manufacturer. What we are going to be looking at today is all of your organizations or companies' PPE. So nothing personally owned by instructors. So, anything that you may have added to your harness as an instructor, if it's yours, that we're not concerning ourselves with that today. Dan might talk about that later on, but this is just the kit owned by the wall or your company. So how does that equipment become PPE? Well, first of all, the manufacturer needs to make an application to the relevant notified body. For this, they're going to have to supply samples, a technical file, and user instructions to that notified body. The equipment will then undergo an EC type examination. So in this, the notified body is going to establish and certify that the PPE satisfies the relevant provisions of the EC directive. For this, it needs to pass the performance test requirements. It's going to need to ensure that the product is suitably marked. The instructions are in compliance with the requirements. The manufacturer's technical file is suitable. And also they need to make sure that there's a quality system in place to control the final product. If it fulfills the requirements, an EC type examination certificate can be drawn up, so it'll be CE marked. So mention the UK or show the UK CA mark on this, because that will soon be coming into play. So the CE mark and the UK CA mark will, here we go. It basically indicates compliance with the minimum requirements of the directive or regulation. If you look at the example there, you can see you've got a bit of a may on with the CE mark. After that, there are 4 digits, and those 4 digits are the reference number for the notified body. The notified body is a test house where the products are type approved or tested basically against the relevant standard. You may also see an EN mark. Again, it mentions there it's not always required, but the EN is the specific standard. So, for example, an EN 361, it shows that that would show that a full body harness is type approved against falls from height. So, as I say, it's not always required, but it is the specific standard. And then from July 1995, it's been illegal to sell any PPE in the EU that isn't properly CE marked. So the relevant thing with that is if you haven't got a CE mark on it and it's new, then it's not, you don't want to use it. And if it looks pretty old and it hasn't got a CE mark, it's highly likely that it's out of date because it's going to be pre-95. So it really just sort of illustrates the importance of that CE mark being on it. So just because it's got a CE mark doesn't mean that it's either good quality or indestructible. As I said, it meets, the CE mark will show that it meets the minimum requirements for its intended purpose. Have you been provided with the right piece of kit for the job? Okay, so just because it's CE marked doesn't mean it's the right bit of kit. With the picture, obviously the choice, we've got a climbing helmet and we've got a Bob the Builder helmet. They both got a CE mark, and the Bob the Builder helmet is certified as being safe for children. So obviously we won't have no choking hazards or no sharp edges, but again, doesn't mean it's safe for use for climbing. So why do we need to inspect this kit? Well, the PPE directive is enforced in the UK by the Trading Standards Department of local authorities and ultimately the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills within the government. The Health and Safety Executive have the option of taking proceedings against manufacturers, suppliers, users or specifiers under Section 6 of the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, where PPE for use at work can be shown to be unsafe. So basically it's law, and that's why we need to inspect it. The employer's responsibilities when we're talking about PPE are to provide the appropriate PPE. They need to make sure that that PPE is traceable. So the easiest way to ensure this is to buy from a legitimate supplier. So line equipment, perfectly good example of a legitimate supplier. It also means, because of that, that the invoice can be used as a declaration or certificate of conformity. I'll show you an example of that on the following slide. More employer responsibilities are that the PPE has no modifications. We'll talk about this again later, but any PPE that has been modified without the say-so of the manufacturer, need to class as damaged. It shouldn't be modified in any way without the say-so of the manufacturer. And no incorrect markings on it. Again, this is something we come to later, but basically, if you're going to mark PPE, it needs to be done without contaminating or weakening the equipment. And also you need to make sure that if you are marking it on somewhere that can be marked, for instance, the label on a harness, you could mark that, but you need to ensure that you don't cover over any IDs or serial numbers or that kind of thing. Briefly, just in case I forget to mention it later on, if you are going to do that, you need to ensure as well that that marker pen, any of the solvents in it, don't leak into the textile of the harness. So if you're going to mark a label, put something underneath it when you write on the label. Hopefully I'll remember to mention that later on. They also need to provide appropriate washing and ongoing maintenance facilities. This more than likely stuff that's going to be carried out by the competent person, but that should be in place to make sure that that PPE is well maintained and usable. So here we have a declaration of conformity, which is a delivery pick note certificate of conformity. So it's an invoice from Lion Equipment. So just an example of how kit can be traceable for the user. And like I said, it could include detailed receipts, invoices, purchase orders, etc. So how are we going to record the PPE? Management systems. So all equipment that you use should be linked into an appropriate management system. So it needs to be recorded or logged. This can be done electronically, or it could be written on paper and filed. Kind of doesn't matter, but it needs to be done by the competent person. It's really useful for everyone else to have access to this as well. So for the instructors to have access to it, but it should be kind of read only for everyone else. It's a really important document or system, and therefore really only the competent person should be changing it or adding to it. All equipment will need a unique identifier to allow this link to be made. Again, this might be something that has to be added. Some equipment comes with a batch number rather than a unique identifier, in which case you're going to need to add this. This needs to be done without damaging the equipment, obviously. So marking on metal, for instance. Again, at Lion Equipment, we can laser etch or engrave onto carabiners if they need a unique identifier. It's not something that should be done by anyone else, really. So yeah, don't use equipment that's been stamped, written on, or had stickers placed on without permission from the manufacturer. May be able to use metal items that have been engraved. So yeah, going back to what I previously said, we can do that at Lion Equipment, and that's obviously with the approval of the manufacturer. And then an example of something that shouldn't be there: a rope with only one end marker. The reason for this is the only way that product, that bit of PPE is traceable is by the end markers, and as most of you will know, in use, those end markers can come off quite easily. If it's only got one to start with and you lose it, you've no way of telling any information about that bit of PPE. If it loses the end marker in a busy climbing wall and gets mixed up with others, you might recognize it as your rope, but do you want to take that risk? So make sure that both ends are properly marked. So who's responsible for the inspection of PPE? Well, I've already mentioned the competent person and the user. To be a competent person, it's someone that has the right training, experience and knowledge. And obviously those things need to be correct, relevant and current. So if if you've been on a PPE inspection course, I don't know, 10 years ago, and you haven't done anything since, then obviously that's not current. You know, it's that kind of thing that we need to look for. And also, as I mentioned at the start, the competent person course at Lion is a 4-day course. So it's, you know, we're doing this in 45 minutes. It's a really in-depth course that you're going to learn a lot on. That competent person also needs to be sufficiently independent and impartial to allow objective decisions to be made. And they also need to be able to act without fear or favour. So basically, they need to have that authority to retire a piece of probably quite expensive kit without feeling pressure from possibly a manager, or, you know, like I say, they're expensive bits of kit, and budgets are always something that need to, well, that are considered. But yeah, as a competent person, you need to be able to make that decision and stand by it. At the end of the day, it's there to keep someone alive. So yeah, shouldn't be any pressure from outside of that. When did we need to do these thorough examinations? So every 6 months is kind of a recommended minimum, really. If we look at a PPE that's maybe used by the police, it's not going to go out every single day. You know, they can happily inspect it every 6 months, unless there are exceptional circumstances, in which case we would employ suitable interval inspections. So if they had a lot of use, they'd maybe inspect it again. When we're talking about climbing walls, and we're talking about harnesses that get hired day in, day out, many times during a day, then I think 6 months isn't enough. So that really would class as an exceptional circumstance. It might, you know, it's perfectly normal in a climbing wall, but, you know, for the purpose of PPE inspections, it probably is exceptional use. So that will come down to the competent person to make that decision. Obviously, all climbing walls, outdoor centres are different. Some are going to be busier than others. So yeah, it's their judgment call. And again, why they need that experience and knowledge. The other person or people responsible are going to be the users, and they're going to carry out the user checks. So who is the user? So in our context, it's going to be the instructor. It's not the client, or if you have store staff, the store staff. They might be kind of the people wearing it, but you're, as the instructor, you're responsible for it. So you're the user. The user checks are basically arrangements to check that the kit is well maintained, and therefore identify obvious faults due to any day-to-day wear and tear, failure or damage. It needs to be fit for the purpose that it was intended. We need to ensure that the equipment will function correctly and is safe to use, obviously correctly sized and correctly fitted. Checked appropriately during the session, so user checks. And these checks include pre-use checks, post-use checks, and during use checks. Now, this thing, I think, you know, it's kind of standard practice, I would imagine, for most instructors. You know, if someone's in a session and they need to go to the loo, they go away, they take the harness off, they come back, you're going to check it again. All the time, whenever you tie them into the rope, you know, you're having a glance over that harness. So, you know, it's nothing out of the ordinary. You're going to be doing these checks continually anyway. I think one thing that's really important here is just to talk about communication between the competent person and the users as well. So really, we're just talking about a two-way street. If the user's unsure whether something is damaged or safe to use, obviously you're going to refer to the competent person. But equally, that competent person, if they discover damage in any way or something that isn't right on a piece of PPE, then it's really, really valuable to let the instructors know, not just make that decision and get rid of the kit. You know, show the instructors and show all your staff this is the kind of thing that you're looking out for, and make sure that, you know, they can recognize it as well. So obsolescence and lifetime. Maximum lifespan of our PPE. Well, best place to get that information is always going to be the manufacturer. And yeah, this is really kind of why the management systems are so important, because everything that's recorded in those management systems are going to help you know how long that piece of kit will last. So obviously you're going to have things recorded like the make and the model, the date of manufacture, an installation inspection, because just because you've bought it from the manufacturer and taken it out the packet, you know, it doesn't mean that it's perfectly safe to use. You always do an installation inspection and make sure that that piece of kit is ready to go and in, you know, usable condition to start with. Date of first use. This is really important because some bits of PPE have kind of a sort of stored shelf life before their kind of usable lifespan begins. As an example, bale ropes, you can store them, I think this is still the case actually, for 5 years, and then they've got 10 years of use. Obviously, if they're used after a month of storage, it's 10 years and a month. But it's information that you need to know. That's why the management systems are important. Also, you'll have subsequent inspections and obviously end of line or date of obsolescence. So when you retire that bit of kit. While we're on that subject as well, destroying kit, yeah, I mean, this might come up in the questions and answers, but what do you do with kit that you've now established is out of date? You know, it should be destroyed if it's no longer safe to use as deemed by the manufacturer because it's out of date. Then it needs to be destroyed properly. One of the things we'd recommend, certainly for like textiles, is to use something like a hot knife that you'd have for cutting ropes. Maybe cut out all of the buckles, cut through the load-bearing stitching. You make sure that that bit of kit can't be reused, can't be repaired by someone that doesn't know what they're doing. And you know, even go as far as recycling buckles if you can in a separate place, different bins maybe for the textile and the buckles. You know, we're trying to ensure that that bit of kit that isn't safe to use doesn't get used by anyone else. So defects. Suspect items should be taken out of service and placed in quarantine. So we've got an example there of a quarantine bin with do not use on it, on the picture on the right there. You need a system for quarantining faulty equipment. If the user, the instructors, find something that they're not sure about, the safest place is to put it into quarantine, and then the competent person can establish whether it's safe to use or not. The reason we need this system is because, you know, as an example, an instructor finds something on a harness and they think, not sure about this, I don't think we should use it, I'll just pop it on the desk in reception. And then they don't tell anyone, nobody knows where it's come from, and after a couple of days of it knocking around, it probably gets put back into use. So you need a quarantine system in place. It doesn't matter what it is, but some sort of field, a drum, a bin like that, I don't know, a locker, it doesn't really matter, but you need that system. If something is quarantined, you're going to inform the competent person what you found and the history of it as well. And that is really important, the history. I saw some of the people kind of joining in with the chat today, saying that, you know, they're from outdoor, maybe high ropes courses, and, you know, if you're taking clients outside, even from a wall, walls that do that, a possible contaminant on a harness might only be mud. So if you, as an instructor, turn back up and you've got this harness that looks contaminated, if you know it's mud, you can tell the competent person and they can clean it. It can be washed, and then it's absolutely fine to be used. If you don't know the contaminant, then we've got to assume that it's damaged the harness, but obviously that that conversation is going to save you a fair bit of money. And finally, repairs. So repairs should only be carried out by a competent person or organisation, and really that's going to be down to the manufacturer. They might be able to send a spare part out, but that'll be a conversation between the competent person and the manufacturer. It may also be possible to send kit back to a manufacturer to have it repaired, depending on what it is. So when we're checking kit, this is always a really good thing to bear in mind. Is it normal? You're going to use that through all visual, tactile and function checks. And obviously experience helps us recognize what normal is. And normal is, well, I mean, it's relatively simple in a, you know, looking at that picture. If one of those carabiners is a different shape to the other, it's not normal. So get rid of it or give it to the competent person. As normal, does it do everything it was designed to do as well? So again, in the picture, we've got a load of screw gate carabiners. If for whatever reason that barrel came off the screw gate, it's still a carabiner and it still operates like a carabiner, but it doesn't mean that you can then use it as a carabiner, a normal snap gate carabiner. It was designed to be a screw gate. And so that screw gate needs to function as it should do. And that carabiner is meant to be used as a screw gate. So really simple. If that function isn't there, it's not normal and don't use it. So what are we going to check for? In textiles, we're going to check for abrasion, deformation, cuts, pulls and tears, heat damage, contamination and UV damage. UV damage, we'll start at this end. UV damage, you'll see that as kind of fading in the textile. Simple place to check on with that sling in fact, if you, as you can see where the load bearing stitching is and that bit of fabric's kind of peeled back, it'll usually be a much brighter color in there than the rest of the sling if it has been UV damaged. And that UV damage is going to weaken the material. Again, we know that from testing. So any discoloration down to UV, it's not safe to use. Heat damage massively weakens textiles. So that bit of webbing there that looks like it's got a bit of weld splatter on it, obviously not something that really should be happening in a climbing wall. But as I mentioned with destroying redundant PPE, you have got things like a hot knife there. So I don't know, there's potential for heat damage in any of that. We don't want to use that PPE. Deformation, so anything that isn't the right shape, it's become deformed through whatever reason. We don't know what's caused that. We may know what's caused that. It might have been that it was massively overloaded. That sling on the top picture looks like that's what's happened to it. But yeah, we don't want to use anything that's been deformed. There's possibly a judgment call with the harness, that tail end there. If that's your own personal harness and it's in and out of that buckle, you know there's no weight going onto that part of the harness. If that was a higher harness, I would definitely say then it should be retired, because obviously that deformed and fluffy section is going to end up the other side of the buckle if it's on a bigger person. But that's, you know, that's the difference between your kit and what you're hiring out. Contamination, as I mentioned previously, if we know what it is and it's harmless, so mud for instance, it can be washed. But if we don't know what it is, we don't know whether that's damaged, weakened the textile at all. So we're not going to use anything that's got an unknown contaminant on it. And then cuts, pulls, tears. Now the reason I've gone through this way around is because leading on from cuts, pulls and tears, it goes quite well into abrasion, because I think for most people, if they saw a cut in a sling, they wouldn't use it. And we know from testing that if you cut through a percentage of a sling. So if we say we cut horizontally through that sling 25%, we're going to lose 25% of its strength. If we put it in a pull test machine, that's what will happen. Obviously with a new sling, not with a damaged one like that. That doesn't mean that you know that you should go and use one now, because you know that this percentage has been damaged by, if it's cut, it's not safe to use. But as I say, we know that percentage. With abrasion, we don't have any clue as to what is damaged on that harness. So sling. So an old fluffy sling like that, that abrasion could be on the strength, the fibers that give that sling its strength. To kind of explain why this works, with a sling, you've got lengthways running fibers called warp, if you want to go all technical on it, and crossways running fibers called weft. So all the strength really comes from the warp fibers. When it's gone fluffy like that, there's no way of telling whether it's those fibers that are damaged or the crossways, the weft fibers. So that sling could be weakened by 20%, it could be weakened by 80%. And like I say, no way of knowing unless we put it in a pull test machine and break it and go, oh, I broke it like 20% or it broke it 80%. Either way, the point is you don't know. So if it's abraded to that level, don't use it. With metals, the things that we're checking for are abrasion, deformation, corrosion, cracks, burrs, sharps, and unusual marks. We start with abrasion. I think it's pretty clear to everyone that that carabiner is worn well beyond what is, what's safe to use. Something that cropped up when I was in the Irish Climbing Symposium was asking about mayons, and the fact that whoever it was, whichever climbing wall it was, couldn't find any information from mayon on the lifespan of it or how much wear was allowed. The lifespan pretty much with most metal items is indefinite, but obviously you're going to check with the manufacturer. But basically you can kind of say that it's okay to use until it's worn out. What we need to know is when it's worn out, and again, most importantly, check with the manufacturer, because they may not all say indefinite, they may give a lifespan. Worn out for us as an industry, we would say no more than 1 millimeter or 10% loss of material, and that's only where it would be expected. So obviously on a carabiner, the rope and the hanger always sit in exactly the same place, the place where it's meant to be loaded. So losing 10% of material from there would be acceptable. If you lost 10% of material from the gate, for instance, the weakest part of that carabiner, then it's not acceptable. So yeah, the point is where it's expected. And really this is, again, it's a competent person's judgment. But if you spot that kind of abrasion as a user, then make sure you take it to the competent person. If we just skip to the burrs and sharps picture, basically, because it's the same thing. If you've got burrs or sharps like that, obviously it could damage the textile it's going to run through, so you don't want them there. As a competent person, providing you're not taking away more than 10% of that material, it would be okay to file that off. But again, that requires the training and the knowledge of the competent person, so I'm not saying that's okay for everyone to do. Corrosion, with the aluminium carabiner, there don't use, and obviously the steel one, well, that one's in a proper state really, isn't it? It's really rusted, and also you can see that the barrel has got a crack in it. With a steel carabiner, a slight bit of corrosion, again, competent person's judgment call, might be acceptable, unless it's in or around the barrel and you can't see because it could be corroded quite heavily inside. But if it's external, you can see it and it can just be rubbed off, it's not pitted the material, then we'd say, yeah, competent person's judgment might be okay. Deformation, the two carabiners there are totally different shapes. One's been massively overloaded, it should be relatively obvious. The top one is kind of elongated a little bit. Obviously that's not going to be safe to use. a point with that. The fact that that's clearly been overloaded, everything else that was involved in that system also would have been overloaded. So all of that wouldn't be safe to use. I don't think it's very likely that you're going to overload something like that in a climbing wall situation. But any deformation with metal isn't acceptable like that. I think the most likely thing is maybe getting something kind of caught in a hanger and it being loaded not in the place that it should be loaded, so obviously bent in that way. Cracks, obviously not acceptable. You can see that hairline crack in a barrel of the May on there. Wouldn't want to use that. And unusual marks, again, something that you don't recognize, so take that to the competent person, let them make that judgment call. I think the example there is probably from welding, so that's been in industrial use. You're probably not going to really see that in a climbing wall. Plastics, what we're checking for? Well, we check for basically exactly the same things that we checked for with textiles and metal, with the addition of stress marks and scratches. Cracks, actually, yeah, there's no real examples in there of abrasion, bit of deformation, but yeah, we'll go through the pictures anyway. So cracks, we got a crack there in the polystyrene liner of the helmet. Again, not acceptable. Any cracks in the outer shell, again, not acceptable. Heat damage, quite easy to happen on plastics. I think we've got some really good examples if you come on the course of heat damage to helmets. One particular one, the whole shell is completely deformed, and that had been in fossil shelf of a car. I think the example there had been left on a desk under a lamp, and you can see that it's deformed because of the heat. It's also going to have made that plastic much more brittle, so yeah, it wouldn't be safe to use. Contamination, as I mentioned before when I was talking about marking equipment, the stickers on that helmet more than likely aren't going to be safe to use by the manufacturer. The stickers contain solvents, exactly the same as writing on a helmet with a marker pen. The marker pen contains solvents, so it can really weaken the material. So we shouldn't be doing either of those things. The reason the other helmet's in the picture is the Petzl one has places on it that you can apply stickers, ones that aren't recommended by the manufacturer. They put a kind of sticker in place that would protect the plastic underneath. Obviously, you check with Petzl, with the manufacturer, as to where to put them and make sure that that's okay. At Line Equipment, we can sticker up helmets. We do it for the Coast Guard, and that's because we have the correct stickers that the manufacturer recommends, and we know that they're safe. They don't have solvents in, so we know we can use them. Equally, we can put number stickers on helmets if that's required. Scratches. We would say that any scratch that you can catch a fingernail in is too deep on the plastic. That plastic's only a few mil thick. So a deep scratch like the ones you can see in the picture are too deep. That would have weakened it too much. UV damage, same with textiles. It makes the material brittle. It weakens it quite a lot. You can see that helmet has been UV damaged. It's kind of a white, creamy color. Inside it was probably almost yellow when it was new. And then the stress marks. So that helmet's had an impact, you can see by the lighter color. That could have damaged inside. Obviously it's damaged the outer shell, so it's weakened and it's no longer safe to use. So when do we need to function check? So just before use, every time for each item. And some examples of this are: when placing a carabiner to attach your belay device to your harness, check that the gate works. Again, should be relatively obvious, but if that gate stays open, even once out of 10 attempts, then, quarantine it and speak to the competent person. It might be that they've decided it's damaged. It's highly likely that that's the case, but it needs to work properly as it should do every single time. When fitting a helmet, check that the cradle adjustment and the chin strap buckle work properly. We'll come on to that a little bit later. Or before you commit on a descender, lower yourself a short way before removing your last cow's tail. So this might be something that you might do if you're doing wall checks at the wall. Basically, the point of this, if you were going to ab off a big cliff, you wouldn't just set up and then lean over the edge and then decide that's the point that you function check. You function check before you put yourself in a dangerous situation. So it's exactly the same for your customers. You know, why would you do that for yourself but not for your customers? You're responsible for them, so make sure that all of the kit works before they're in that situation where they really need it. What to check for? So we're going to check that everything works like it should do. With regards to ropes, that they knot easily and that they fit in devices. Obviously ropes can get quite stiff, so if it doesn't knot properly, if it ends up with a big loose knot because it's really stiff, it's not functioning as it should do, don't use it. And make sure it fits in the device. So we talked about abrasion with textiles. With a rope, you can allow a little bit more abrasion on the outer sheath because the core of the rope is what's given it its strength. You don't have that with a sling. So a little bit more abrasion is okay with a rope, but obviously it still needs to function correctly. So if it's gone so fluffy it doesn't work in the device, then it's not safe to use. Carabiners close and lock smoothly and reliably. So going back to what I said before, even if it doesn't work 1 out of 10 times, yeah, quarantine it. Helmets, check that the cradle adjusts and doesn't easily slip. We'll come on to how we check that in a bit, and that the buckles clip up. And then harnesses, that the buckles can be adjusted and lock. So basically check everything does what it's supposed to do. So now we'll have a look at some specific problems. With connectors, that the gate springs open and closes fully. Again, just been talking about that. The locking mechanism must work smoothly and obviously actually lock. You can see in the example the little ball catch is missing, so that's clearly a damaged one. And that both of these things need to be reliable. Obviously the gate is the weakest part on a carabiner, so you would quarantine that if it's damaged or worn. Yeah, going back to things that we've already mentioned. And any concerns, competent person. You know, that's why the course is a 4-day course, so they've got the knowledge and experience, or more knowledge and experience than they already had, to be able to make these decisions. Specific problems with slings. You can see on that example that the load-bearing stitching has started to come undone. So you're going to check every part and obviously quarantine if the stitching is not neat, tight, and damaged. Any damage to any load-bearing stitching on harnesses or slings, then it's not going to be safe to use. But if you spot that kind of thing, again, as always, go and speak to the competent person, show them. Ropes, we need to make sure that we use the correct type, diameter and length. And that obviously leads on to the fact that it should be labelled correctly at each end. This goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. If you've only got one end marker and you lose it, and then that rope gets mixed up, you can't be 100% sure that that was your rope. And obviously the type of the rope, diameter and the length are really important in whether it's going to work in your devices, if it's the right type of rope to be using for the situation you're using it in. Again, that, you know, management systems, this kit needs to be labelled correctly. Look and the feel of the rope. Again, we go through that on the course, but you're looking for heavily abraded bits or lumps, bumps, anything that isn't normal. And again, you know, that is it normal. thing is a really good point to start with in your head when you're checking kit. And then finally, the protective sheath allows for a little bit more abrasion than obviously slings, and I explained why that is, but obviously it needs to function correctly in the device. And again, any concerns, speak to the competent person. Specific problems with helmets. Obviously, we're going to check the textile and the plastic parts. Check every part of the helmet inside and out. Don't force the mechanism. So I said I was going to talk about this. When you're checking the mechanism on a harness, on a helmet, obviously we need to make sure that it works through its full range, so it'll fit all of the potential customers you're going to put it on. So it's worth, on a proper check, maybe not a quick function check before you give it to a customer, but you're going to check that it holds where it should in all of those different adjustments. And you're just going to give a little light pull on that mechanism. If you start really pulling on the mechanism, obviously it's going to damage it. And that is even more important when you're checking the shell of the helmet. So don't flex it to check. I think we've got some, well, we've definitely got some examples in training at Lion where the inner polystyrene of the helmet is cracked. And this is, we'd be using a helmet for people to find a specific problem on, and now there's more problems on it because during those checks they've managed to crack the polystyrene as well. So if you flex it too much, you're going to damage it. So again, you've got to be quite careful with checking these things, but obviously they all need checking. And obviously check that it fits the user. And once again, any concerns, speak to the competent person. Harnesses. So again, we're going to check every single part of it. And really, it's especially the load-bearing stitching here. Any damage to the load-bearing stitching can be quarantined immediately. That's obviously the thing that's holding it together. So, and there's also why I mentioned, if you cut through that, if you're destroying a harness. Quarantine if the gear loops or the leg elastics are damaged. With the harnesses that you use in an instructor session, they're probably not going to have gear loops, but obviously instructors' harnesses have usually a bit of kit hanging off them. Any damage to a gear loop, there's risk of it breaking and something heavy falling on someone. So they need to be quarantined if the gear loops are damaged. Exactly the same with leg elastics. They're obviously there to keep the harness in the correct shape if you fall into it. If they're damaged and you do fall into it, then you risk ending up in a pretty uncomfortable position or potentially dangerous position. And things like leg elastics can probably easily be repaired. And again, it's the manufacturer you would contact to find out about that. They might be able to send you out a spare part, or it might be that you can send it back to them and they can repair it for you. Check protective covers on attachment points. Again, see plenty of examples of the protective cover being worn through. If that's worn through, can you check whether the material underneath is damaged? If that protective cover is worn through, then quarantine it. The ends of straps may be folded back and stitched. Quarantine if damaged or deformed. So the example on the left there, that termination is folded back quite considerably. It's almost folded flat. So if that ended up really close to the buckle, there is a chance that could come through the buckle. It's not going to do its job then. So obviously that's unsafe. Again, I've seen an example where that termination has been cut. We kind of really hope that it hadn't been cut so that they could extend the harness even further. With that, again, I'll always refer back to the manufacturer. The manufacturer may give a length of sort of tail that they're happy with, that extends outside of the buckle. So if someone's cut a termination so that they can get extra width on that harness, then clearly it isn't safe. So you really check, those determinations are really important. But also while we're talking about that, check with the manufacturer how much tail they recommend coming out of it, because then they may give you a definite length that they recommend as being safe. Obviously check that it fits the user as well. And then we've got that other picture as well that shows the deformation that we saw before. Obviously, any concerns, you're going to speak to the competent person. So really, that's kind of the end of the slides that I want to show you, but there are a few things that we should consider. I think it's really important to question any damage to any PPE and try and establish why it's happening, or why it's happened. Was that damage a one-off? And do you know what caused that? And if it isn't a one-off, if it's always happening to the same bit of kit on the same bit of wall, then obviously you could save your company quite a bit of money if you can establish that, because you're not going to keep putting that kit through that same bit of use. If it's an instructed session on the same bit of wall and it always wears through that rope or whatever more frequently, then that information is really useful. As I say, you can save yourself quite a bit of money by establishing that and not continuing to do that. The really important things to go over: each organization should have a competent person, and anything that you're unaware of as a user or unsure of, you always go to that competent person to make that judgment call. If they're not available, then the manufacturer is the best place to start. And really, for the competent person as well, if they're unsure of anything, the manufacturer is always the best place. They may have a lot of information on their website. Petzl, for instance, obviously we're quite closely involved in Petzl, but obviously that's why we know about it. And on their website, there's tons of information. An example, if you look into the technical information on a gree, you'll find a technical notice, the declaration of conformity, a PPE inspection procedure, PPE checklist, tips for maintaining it, and also frequently asked questions. So there's a real depth of information there that's going to give you pretty much everything you need to know regarding that piece of PPE. And yeah, I don't know other manufacturers as well, but it's obviously a really good starting point. And if they don't have the information on the website, then I'm sure they'd be rather that you phone them and ask someone and got that technical advice from them rather than deciding yourself. Cool. So yeah, that's that from me. I'll hand you back to Rob. Thanks for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, buddy. If you could unshare your screen for me, that would be fantastic. And I will ask all of our panelists and question and answer guests to join us back. Kate, Jono, Dan, fantastic. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you very much, Mark. That was excellent, dude. Really good information there. I hope you all got a lot out of it. There's been some really good questions coming in already, but I hope some of you are sitting there frantically typing, getting those questions into us. Let's dive into it. So obviously this is general PPE stuff that we're talking about, stuff that's going to help throughout all of this, throughout all of your lives working in climbing walls and stuff. But there was quite a lot of questions that came in right at the start of the day on COVID specific stuff. And obviously I think that's something that's hot on people's minds. So let's get through those questions just now, and we can dive into some of the more technical ones. So the questions that were coming in were all roughly the same. It was people or climbing walls that have limited equipment, and the 72-hour having to quarantine your kit for 72 hours can reduce how much they can do quite significantly. If they don't have enough kit, how are they meant to operate? How are they meant to keep their kit safe? Is there better ways to look after and sanitize and keep your kit safe? other than the 72-hour quarantining? Is there other ways to disinfect metalwork, webbing, this kind of thing? And obviously, some of that information is going to be very specific to the manufacturers, but, Kate, you've got the experience of the practical side of this. Mark, John, O'Dan, you've got the experience from the sort of manufacturer side. So yeah, what's your thoughts on the topic?
First of all, from a climbing wall perspective, the original message of 72 hours of quarantining is something that we have at the Leighton Climbing Centre reassessed in our risk assessments. We know that fomite transmission is a much lower risk for COVID transmission than once considered. And you have to, within a centre, think the person is touching the harness, they're also touching all the holes, they're touching a lot of different things, the top ropes. We're not going to take those out of use every time somebody's touched them. So we have reduced our quarantining to 24 hours. We feel it's a good idea not to pass a harness directly from one customer to another. So we have a 24-hour quarantine bin for our harnesses. And the metalware obviously can just be sprayed. We are using a standard surface disinfectant, which is not creating a problem for the hardware. So that's something that people have to make their own risk assessment on. If you had very vulnerable customers, you may want to think twice, but then you may not want them in a climbing centre at the moment with the contacts, even with the knowledge we now have about chalk dust and the effect that has on the virus. So be very keen to hear other people's opinion on that.
Jonathan's got his hand up, he's ready to go.
Yeah, I'll chip in. If people don't know me, I'm kind of with the home of Petzl, Last Sportive and others, but when I'm not doing that, I also do a lot of accident investigation, a lot of it in the rope access world for the accidents there. So I have knowledge of these subjects, and we've looked carefully at this issue. And Kate's quite right. We really sometimes don't really know. Research work done in February 2021 by De Montfort University on clinical garments. They worked out that things like polyesters could carry the COVID issue for a longer period than other fabrics. Polyesters less so. So to give an idea, 72 hours for polyester was they thought was reasonable for the bug to disappear. Polycottons maybe 24 hours, and only 6 hours on pure cotton. That's what they discovered. I can share this information with you if you like, so people see it. Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. They looked at some sports equipment. They were looking at sports equipment like cricket balls, for example, tennis balls, and their research found out that things that are sort of absorbent, so tennis balls, have less chance of transmitting the virus than a hard surface. So again, different type of surfaces, different materials. So it's a really tricky one to answer. To categorically say this is what we're going to do. I think we have to still err on the side of caution to a degree because we don't know. I think Kate's approach is a pretty healthy approach, and also letting the client know what you're doing. So if somebody is coming who feels a bit nervous, a bit anxious, a bit vulnerable, they may say, I might stay away. Commercially, maybe not such a good idea. But if we want to look after the clients, we need to tell them what we're doing. So spraying metal surfaces, yeah, it kind of makes sense, that does, to make it clean. But your climbing walls, you're not going to clean. But I think if people are actually disinfecting their hands when they come in, hand sanitizer, those sort of things, the chalk obviously helps. That's got to help. The bigger issue, I think, is airborne transmission, where people are coughing and spluttering over each other at close range. That's more of an issue in some respects. But I think having some controls in place where you are the minimum 24 hours does make sense to be able to do that. Interesting enough, as an aside, you go to H&M with my daughter last weekend in Carlisle. You can try and close their changing rooms. They spray a bit and disinfect on them, put them back on the shelf for somebody else to try. So, there's probably a greater risk there. There's probably a greater risk when you go shopping and someone picks something up in the supermarket, puts it back on the shelf and have not bought it, than there is in the climb walls. What we're doing, I think, is good practice. And I think having some controls is important. So you 24 hours, I wouldn't want to see less than that, I don't think, Kate. I think you're heading in the right direction there, but you must tell your clients what you're doing. So they can make their own decision whether they feel safe or not, the case may be. So not a clear answer, but a bit of guidance.
And clearly we don't spray anything on our harnesses because that would not be a good thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good balance you've reached there, Kate, because the other thing you've got, we all want to factor in is the positive mental and physical well-being benefits of being able to exercise, socialize with social distancing at the climbing wall, and how important that is to everybody. And I think as long as you are, the key thing is do your risk assessment and then follow it. You're going to be in much worse trouble if you don't follow whatever you say you're doing. And I think Jono's point about informing your customers, at the end of the day, they need to be well informed so they can decide if they're happy to partake in the activity. So yeah, I mean, there's nothing that either of you said that I disagree with at all. It's good.
Yeah, good. Well, really easy to go down the rabbit hole in this one, so we'll call it there. We'll get some good in-depth answers, and we'll send this out to you afterwards as well. So let's move on to the next question. While you mentioned something there, Kate, obviously not spraying your harnesses and stuff with random chemicals, talking about contamination. So there was a question that came in about what are the effects of bodily fluids on PPE, and then there's another question that came in afterwards. Sports centres that are located with a swimming pool nearby, are they at higher risk? So bodily fluids, I think that's going to be a really interesting one. I'm going to chip in and say that nobody should be licking your harnesses. So you can knock that one off the list straight away, especially not during COVID times. Stop licking things and other people.
I think the bodily fluids one is a really difficult one because you don't know what's in it, basically. I think it's more of a biological risk, I think, than a damage to the material. Jono might have a better answer on this, but obviously there's different strengths of urine, and you just don't know. I mean, like, yeah, how can you judge that? I think if it's washed properly, using the manufacturer's guidelines, the manufacturer is going to give ideas of like a temperature that it can be washed at, and that varies between manufacturers. I think it's usually around 25-30 degrees, something like that, with soap flakes or something that isn't, that's relatively kind on it. I think that's probably where I would be going with it. But like I say, I think it's more of an issue from like a biohazard point of view, and things like HIV and stuff. That's what you're more worried about. And if anyone else wants to chip in, I'm more than happy.
Yeah, I think unless you're giving a harness to the Alien from Alien, the Alien trilogy or whatever, with acid for blood, you probably, I guess, as long as you clean it according to manufacturer's guidance fairly quickly. And I guess if you're giving equipment out or your customers are using it, you're going to want to clean it, because you don't want customers having stuff that's covered in bodily fluid. Who wants that? So yeah, I think there was a study, John, you might remember this, Jono, from some rope access kit that had been weed on and left for a bit, and the results weren't great, but I think we all questioned what that person had been drinking previously.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was referring to, with not quite knowing what's in it.
But I think cleaning stuff rapidly, you're going to want to do that anyway. I don't think there's going to be any structural problems. It is, as you've said, Mark, a biohazard issue.
Yeah, at our wall, obviously, I mean, amongst groups, it is an issue. It does happen, and the policy should be that the harness is put into clean water initially, anyway, as soon as possible to dilute. Leaving them lying around for a long period of time just isn't a good thing to do, full stop. If it's got bodily fluids on, so into some water, and then using the manufacturer's recommended washing procedures before it goes back into use.
Yeah, I concur with all the views there. Biological hazards are more the issue really there, but getting it clean as quickly as possible, putting in some clean water makes lots of sense straight away. There was research work done years ago, back in the 80s, from TUV, the German test house. And they got a climbing rope back from a crag, which had a lot of ants climbing all over it. And whatever the ants were excreting did severe damage to the rope. I think it lost a third of its strength in a very short length of time. And I don't think any washing would have cleaned that, to be honest. No. So there are things you're not sure about. And only the things, if in doubt, quarantine is, I think. But what we're talking about the day-to-day here that Kate's experiencing, yeah, get in some clean water, leave it to soak, clean it by manufacturing instructions. And I'm pretty comfortable with that, to be honest. And I say, you don't want the biological hazard around other people, especially young people or vulnerable people. There's a little comment come up there, I guess, ansex-free formic acid. Absolutely correct. Yeah,
Yes.
that was the problem.
Yeah.
I could probably find a report somewhere. It's probably before I was computers, I think. So it'll be I'll have to scan it and send it around. I think it is around somewhere.
Yeah, and somebody's also made a comment about vomit, which obviously could have much higher levels of acid in than mild uric acid in sweat or urine. But yeah, vomit could probably, if you left that for any length of time, would probably do some damage, wouldn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Just saying, if I came across a harness that had been vomited on, I might question putting it on just in general. So there was 2 questions that came in actually that I think are relevant to something that we were discussing when we were creating this thing actually. Due to certain changes since Brexit, obviously we're not going to get political here, but will the safety standards markings change now?
Right. So I go for this one.
Yeah, here we go.
You can answer this one, Jono.
Yeah, right. You've got 2 or 3 hours. I'll start to do as quickly as possible. No, in all honesty, yes, you will see some changes. Products you will still see CE marked by pretty much all the manufacturers, because any manufacturer in the UK wanting to sell to Europe will need a CE mark for the product. If you're a European manufacturer wanting to sell in Europe, you'll need a CE mark. If you're a European manufacturer wanting to sell into the UK, you'll need an additional mark, which will be UKCA or NICA if you're in Northern Ireland. The time frame for it is we have this year, 2021, to start and go through the compliance process. And then by the end of this year, the 1st of January 2022, the UKCA mark should be affixed to the product by a dangly tag on the instructions, but not actually marked on the product at that point. By the end of 2022, it should be indelibly marked on the product where possible, without a CA mark. The big problem that we're having with ourselves, DMM, for example, is actually finding space on some of the products to get it there. That's one of the issues. We will still use European standards for the foreseeable future to test our products against, although that may change in the future, but we don't know where that's going yet. So the standards should stay the same, which is pretty healthy, to be honest. The issue that most manufacturers are starting to see is that the bodies that need to test these products have to be UK based, and there are a limited number of people who can do that. They're also been incredibly busy with type approving PPE against COVID. So it's face masks and visors and those things. They haven't got the capacity currently to do the work that needs to be done. So the Outdoor Industries Association are currently lobbying government and HSE to say, can we have an extension period? But don't quote me on that, because it's definitely not in place yet. But we are looking to see if we can extend the period for the transition period, and we'll keep everyone involved. And there's a bit of discussion within the group, the panel here today, that we might have a session on this at a later date, later in the year, to let you know. So the problem is actually getting these products tested. They have to be retested. The tests are identical. The paperwork's identical. Being a bit political, it's a bit of a farce, to be honest. It's going to cost everyone a bit more money, but we have to do it. So you will see products with UKCA marking on it at some point, probably either later this year and certainly into early next year. But the standards will still be the same, whatever it might be, whether it's for a descender, whether it's for a harness or whatever. So in a nutshell, that's it. But we'll try and keep you posted through this group if that's okay. We can do that, can't we, Rob?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. We've got, well, any changes to anything like that, the contacts that we've got for all of you, Scott can send out all the information, so that's easy.
Just to update, the group that's working on this is DMM, Lion, Petzl, and Edelrid are the group working on the UK, representing UK climbers, effectively. And you've got the BMC working on it as well, haven't you, Dan?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good. So there was a comment that's literally just come in, kind of relevant to the question we just asked, answered, sorry. And I believe I have an answer for this. You may correct me if I'm completely wrong here. Feel free, make me look like an idiot. But it's interesting that, we've said that not to spray harnesses with anything when Edelrid have approved the use of certain sprays. I believe that the case there is Edelrid have done the test for their kit. Other manufacturers haven't yet. So just as a general rule of thumb, not spraying random chemicals on your kit, because those manufacturers may have not done those tests and those materials may not handle it. So yeah, that's why Edelrid turned out and said that. I am right in saying that, right?
That's absolutely correct. If the manufacturer approves the use of a spray for textiles, fine and dandy, they've done the research work. The research work doesn't take place in a week to do. It can take years to do the research work.
Yeah.
Just by way of information, Bail, the French rope manufacturer, are currently testing some cleaning agents for ropes at the moment. And it's a long-term program, but hopefully there'll be something there. But only use what the manufacturer's saying you can use. Don't go and reach in the kitchen cupboard and think, oh, that looks good. It cleaned the bathroom well last week.
Yeah.
Won't necessarily work for you.
Yeah. Cool. Question for Mark, actually. So you mentioned that it's not recommended to put stickers on helmets and things. There's a question that came in. What about stickers on carabiners or other metal work? You know, I think a lot of us and a lot of climbers out there, hopefully you guys listening to this, we may all have tough tags on our gear. So what about stickers on metalwork?
Yeah, and metal, it's fine. I can't see any issue with putting it on metal. I think the only thing to consider is, you know, maybe occasionally removing it and having a look underneath just to make sure that there's no, if it's a steel one, no rust, or, you know, it's, you can't check the whole thing, can you, if it's covered in a sticker, but there should be no issue at all. And I'm just kind of playing safe by saying check underneath it every now and again.
Yeah, good. So there was two questions came in, and this is going to lead on to another one as well. Two questions came in about how do we dispose of helmets that have passed their lifespan. Obviously, ropes can be cut up, harnesses can be cut up. What about helmets?
I'd say just cut all of the cradle out. Make sure that you can't use it as a bucket then. So, you know, what you're not going to be able to put it on your head if there's no cradle and no webbing or anything like that. And in exactly the same way as you destroying a harness, make sure it can't be reassembled and reused. So destroy it properly.
Yeah. Just to follow up on you know, the recycling side of things. So one of the things that we're working on, which has been stalled a little bit by COVID, but hopefully we'll be able to pick up on it again soon, is to kind of have a general information portal, mainly aimed at recreational climbers, but it'll apply to everyone really, on, you know, places where you can recycle and upcycle used climbing equipment. There's a few businesses out there doing stuff on a small scale, but there's also some bigger initiatives, and there's also some manufacturers getting on board with getting stuff back and reusing it where possible. So there's going to be a web page and stuff with all that information on at some point in the future. So that's something our sort of access and environmental team are currently working on. So that might be of interest in the future. Not throwing it in the bin.
You could be a bit inventive as well. I think one of our ex-employees has got some very nice petzl hanging baskets.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Old helmets make great flower pots.
Yeah.
Rob, you mentioned a question earlier about swimming pools and climbing walls, did you?
Yes.
A bit of experience from me on that one, research that's been done. Swimming pools, generally there's a high chlorine environment. It's in the air, it's warm, it's moist sort of thing. Metal products and chlorine environments don't go together very well. Basically, where you've got screw threads, nuts and bolts, where you've got enclosed parts, you get what's called galvanic corrosion, and that leads to stress corrosion cracking. Very predominant in the offshore industry, and that's where my experience comes from, in the marine environment, not a million miles away from the climb wall environment. So extra vigilance in making sure your equipment's kept very clean and well lubricated if that needs to be done. And just be careful with it sort of thing. And it might be, we talk about lifetime of products, metal products have a longer lifetime, but you may need to think about shortening them if there's signs of corrosion. Some products, for example, where you've got anodizing on alloy products, that anodizing can start to craze. And it's usually where the manufacturers put some markings on the product. You'll see that crazing starting to happening. And that's time to be really thinking about, is it now time to retire it? So a bit more caution when you've got a swimming pool environment with high chlorine in the air.
Cool.
Yeah, we're going to be tackling this at Preston. The centre at Preston has obviously got a swimming pool within the building, but a fair way away from the climbing wall. But we're having the metalwork inspected fairly thoroughly there.
Yeah, great. Spot on, Kate.
Yeah, grand. Where was it? I had a question here. Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. And I think this might be the last question before our break, but like I said, we'll get answers to all of these questions in the future. So how should how the kit is being used be taken into account when inspections are being completed? Can a greater level of wear or damage be more acceptable when that kit is being used in lower impact or lower consequence situations? Who wants it?
Do you think the question's asking if you've retired it from being a PPE piece of equipment, could it be used in a non-body load bearing situation? Is that, do you think, the question?
Possibly, or even kit that's just generally used in very low impact places, you know, like top ropes compared to dynamic lead climbing ropes. If centres have got different ropes for each use, could top ropes be allowed to get a little bit more fuzzy than lead ropes?
I think the issue with that is whether it works in the device, which is, you know, one of the things I talked about. It's, you know, you can allow for a little bit more abrasion on a rope, but if it doesn't work in the device, then it's not good to use.
I think that's a really good point, Mark. If you just think about your customers, who's more likely to be using your top ropes, you know, new people to the sport, and if they've just learned to belay, and then the first thing they get to use is a really knackered, stiff, furry rope that barely goes through their device, you're not giving them a very good customer experience. Forget about the safety side of things. So it's all something to factor into, you know, how you do things. You've also got, you know, if you're really pushing it with something, you know, are you going to give yourself problems with equipment management? You know, are you set up to prevent people from taking those ropes and leading on them, for example? That's an extra thing you've got to build in. You know, things are really straightforward.
Yeah, it's not a simple answer there.
Yeah, I mean, something that was talked about, which I might refer to in my session, is this idea that you rarely have one big issue that causes an accident or a near miss or something. You know, this idea of this lemon theory, where it's little things stacking up. You know, you've got to be really careful with doing stuff like that. If you think it's okay, and it just might be okay, but then one other thing comes into play, and then you've got a problem. So, yeah,
within a climbing wall environment, you always have issues about, you know, if there's a sling that's been retired from the wall use, but someone's using it to haul a bucket, what's to stop it ending up getting turned around and put back on the wall at some point, unless you've done something to mark it as not for use? I mean, you do end up with management issues, and it is important, if you've got equipment around that looks like it's fit for the purpose that you normally use that equipment for, what's to stop somebody using it if you've decided it's no longer good for that purpose? And that's where the destroying equipment becomes quite an important thing to do, or to have marked it in a completely indelible way that it is very clearly never to be used again as PPE.
Like I agree with that.
With plants growing in them, it can't be used again as a helmet, or a sling that's come off the wall has been retired for wall use. How do you stop that going back into wall use? And I think that's where your systems have to work. Top ropes, you've got both ends of the spectrum with people using top ropes. A brand new top rope that's gone into use could be very slick versus, and if that's on the wall next to another rope that's stiff as an old doggy rope and won't go through a belay plate, you've created an instant problem for your less experienced climbers to deal with, where belaying on one rope will feel very different to belaying on the other rope. And so that is, you know, reasons for sort of batch changing your ropes, or, you know, generally speaking, at a climbing wall, your ropes should be retired long before there's a risk of them breaking or being, you know, in any way a danger through wear. They get retired because they're no longer handle.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree with all that. Thank you very much, guys. Cool. Well, we're going to wrap it up there for the question and answers. We'll let all you guys go away for a quick 25-minute break, get some food, get a drink, chill out, relax the brain a little bit, get yourself psyched up for Dan Middleton's round 2 this afternoon. We'll see you all back here at 12 o'clock. Excellent. We've got the full team back. Welcome back, everybody. You guys get a good break there? Mark, you've recovered?
All good, yeah.
Dan, are you ready? Excellent, cool. So yes, welcome back, everybody. We've still got the 100-odd people that were here earlier, which is excellent. Not too many of you have fallen asleep over lunch, which is great to see. Welcome back. This is the online PPE webinar. If you missed the introduction this morning, we're going to be handing over to Dan Middleton for the BMC to talk about customer equipment and customer PPE and how we as Climbing Wall staff can keep an eye out and things. And then once Dan has finished his presentation, we will all be back, all of us again, to go through some specific questions for Dan and then hopefully get through some of the bigger questions from earlier on this morning. We will have a good amount of time this afternoon to answer loads of questions. If there's any that we don't get through, remember, I am going to be keeping track of all of these and I'll get them all answered and sent all the answers sent out to you in the coming weeks. So while Dan's speaking, use the question and answer section. Please don't hold back. Ask as many questions, as most technical questions as you possibly can. Go for it, test us, and we'll see you all back in a little bit for the question and answers. Cool. Thank you very much, guys. Dan, you can take it away, buddy.
Thanks very much, Robert. Just share my screen.
Excellent, I can see that.
Great, okay. Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks everyone for sticking it out to the afternoon session. I'll try not to send you to sleep during this session. So just a little bit more about myself and my background. Yeah, BMC technical officer, been doing it coming up 15 years now. Did an undergraduate degree in materials engineering, which is kind of how I ended up running the test laboratory for line equipment. So Jonathan is one of my old bosses. Kate Phillips also used to be one of my bosses too, because my climbing wall experience was at Kendall Wall, floor walking, doing the Saturday clubs for youths and stuff. And yeah, I mean, I've got an RCI. I think it was called an SPA or an SPSA when I did it quite a long time ago. And what I'm going to do on this session, if I can operate things properly, right, okay, yeah, is talk about the other side of things. So Mark did a really great presentation on dealing with the PPE that you manage and have responsibility for in the centre, but what about all the stuff that your customers may be bringing in with you and the safety management of the customer's personal equipment? So that's the subject of this afternoon's session, you know, and hopefully this will raise a few questions and, you know, we can help answer them at the end, hopefully answer them as part of the presentation and then answer a few things afterwards. So yeah, really my aim, what I'm hoping to achieve is to provide you a toolkit, really, something to help you identify and if necessary deal with common safety issues with your customers' personal equipment. So I'm going to start off. It's always good to, you know, put things into context, and this is a real life case study. So this is a rope which broke, and this got sent in to the BMC's technical committee, which I'm the secretary of. So it's a smallish group of volunteers, industry experts, and so forth. And yeah, this was sent in to us to investigate. So the use of this rope, well, this happened at an indoor wall. So I think this dates back to like about 2013. So it's, you know, reasonably old, but 2013, and the climber was, I believe they were top roping. In any case, they were being lowered off at an indoor wall, and the rope unexpectedly broke on them. And yeah, unfortunately, they took a around about 7-meter ground fall and suffered serious injuries, sort of life-changing injuries, really. It took a good, I think, about a year to rehabilitate from. So, you know, seriously bad news and something pretty grim for everyone to witness and be involved with. So that's, that's kind of what, getting towards our worst case, isn't it? What can happen? This was a customer's rope, so this wasn't a wall rope. This is something that had been brought in to the centre. So I'm going to ask a question, and then Robert is going to put a poll up. What you think about the answer to this question, a simple yes or no. And that question is, should we check customers' personal equipment, or do we assume it's serviceable and fit for purpose? So you should be able to see a poll coming up now. There's not a right or wrong answer. I'm deliberately not going to attempt to answer this question directly. We'll maybe save it for the panel discussion later, but just think about that. Should we check customers' personal equipment? I'm not a wall manager, so I'm not going to say you should do this or you shouldn't, but we'll talk around it and give you a toolkit, so that if if this is something you think you need to do, you've hopefully got the skills and some awareness about how to do it. So we'll just leave that poll up for a bit longer. So I don't know, Robert, if you can see how many people have responded or not. I can't see, but
yeah, about 70% of the audience have already voted. Please, if you haven't done it already, it should be up on your screens. The poll is live. Should we check customers' personal equipment or not? Yes or no? Please, if you haven't done it already, click yes or no. If you've got thoughts on it, there's a lot of, there's maybe 30-40% of you are so far saying no, 60% are saying yes. If you've got any thoughts, use the question and answers, leave some comments as well.
Okay, so yeah, if we carry on now, then, so we'll leave that question kind of hanging, but I'm gonna, if it works, hang on. I'm going to approach this in terms of what a desired outcome might be for you operating a climbing wall. And, certainly for me, someone working for an NGB, we want customers, we want participants to have a safe and enjoyable climbing experience and to keep coming back. And so although you might not have control over the equipment they bring in, it's not inspected or looked after by you, necessarily. You do want this as an outcome, and so there might be some steps that you can take which sort of help your customers achieve this. And this is very much about striking a balance. So equipment failure is really rare. It's very rare compared to the other things you're going to come across day to day, which I would call poor behavior, but bad belaying, inattentive belaying, incorrect belaying, people forgetting to tie in, people forgetting to clip themselves into the auto belay, all those sorts of things. So that, as a floor walker, is going to be your primary focus, but maybe there's little things you can do to help your customer out. And the other thing, another way of thinking of this is thinking in terms of engagement and upskilling your customers through discussion rather than policing. Can you give them that sort of extra thing that helps them to be a better climber, a safer climber, and then keep coming back? Are your customers going to appreciate you overly pestering them about their kit and worrying over small details? It probably most importantly, in a busy wall, it's 6:30 Wednesday evening, all your regulars are piled in. What practically are you going to be able to spot? If you're floor walking, desk staff, etc. What's actually practical and reasonable for you to spot? That may be fairly limited. So balance. It's an important thing to think about, but let's be honest. The behavioural side is the main thing that you're going to be doing to help your customers stay safe. So if you were at some of the previous seminars, webinars, I think Peter Nellis came up with this and mentioned this traffic light system. So you know, this can be a really helpful tool if you're going to be thinking about engaging with your customers, and you know, if you're spotting something which you're unhappy with or you're not sure about. And as we've said, you know, when it comes to problems in kit, the relatively, you know, real immediate danger of death or serious injury, like the one I used as my starting point, that's really rare. So, you know, red interventions where you're, you know, going over to stop something really bad happening, you know, that's, you know, hopefully that never happens to you in your career. Much more likely are these amber level discussions where you're initiating a discussion, maybe going over for a chat, finding out a little bit more, collecting more information, maybe suggesting some options to your customer. You might go green and allow them to continue, but say, you know, maybe next time you come back, I'm going to bring some different kit with you, all those sorts of things. And I think a key thing when you're using this traffic light system is think about who your customer is. You know, have they just recently completed an induction as an independent adult climber? So, you know, they're newly deemed competent. You know, what's their skill level and knowledge going to be like? You know, maybe this is a great opportunity for you to upskill them, and then, you know, them go away thinking, oh, you know, that was really great. I found out some stuff I didn't know. Or maybe are they an experienced veteran climber, and they're going to respond a bit better to a more persuasive approach. You know, we all know they can be some of the trickiest customers to deal with. You know, if you're really busy, do you really want to be ignoring all the belaying behavior going on and having an argument with somebody about how old their harness is, for example? So, you know, the soft skills side of things here is really important, but you know that anyway. So, you know, in your busy wall environment, particularly if you're floor walking at sort of prime time, you know, your main eye is going to be checking for sort of sketchy behaviours, you know, rather than sort of forensically checking your customer's kit in detail. But you're likely to want to have a really good knowledge of the kit, you know, so you can pick things out easily. Fortunately, you know, in the indoor setting, the sort of spread of kit that you need to know about is, you know, more limited than stuff that people are going to use outside. So really, you know, the areas you want to focus any knowledge that you have are going to be on harnesses, belay devices and the carabiner that's being used with it, and any ropes. You know, if you do have a centre that has lead climbing facility, the ropes that people are bringing in, maybe harnesses to a lesser extent, but you know, that's something you see less and less of, if at all, with customers bringing their own in now. Mostly harness helmets will be related to, you know, group use with certain groups. So, you know, fairly limited amount of kit, but there's quite a wide range of things that you might want to be looking out for. So I'm just going to list those, and then we'll go into these each sort of part in more detail. So yeah, likely issues, you know, broadly grouped. So the first one, damaged or old equipment. Then we've got uncertified or counterfeit equipment. Badly fitted or poorly chosen equipment, stuff that's not very compatible, that kind of thing. Non-climbing equipment, so stuff that, you know, it might be PPE, but it's not for climbing or mountaineering. And recalled equipment, so things that, you know, you've heard about, had a recall or a, you know, notice of inspection issued for them. You know, you might be able to help your customer by just checking that they've received that information. So let's go into each of those headings in a little bit more detail. So, and these were put in no particular order, really. So I'm not saying this is the most important. It's probably the most dramatic. Okay, so just to show that my previous case study wasn't a complete fluke, this is, excuse me, this is yet another snapped rope leading to a ground fall whilst being lowered off at a climbing wall. Now, luckily, this time, no serious injury resulted. You know, this person was really lucky. They landed flat on their back from about 2 meters onto rubber crumb matting, which proved its worth. And they walked away shaken up, but fortunately not injured, unlike the previous case. So again, this came into the BMC's technical committee. So that slide there is a little bit of a close-up showing, you can see there, a fairly obvious colour change, some sort of bleaching out of the dyes in the sheath. And there's also some sort of like bleeding out the colours, as well as the bleaching, the fading, and the sort of whitening. The colours have sort of bleached into each other. The other big giveaway that something, apart from the rope breaking, of course, the other big giveaway on this is when I inspected it, the rope kind of felt funny, didn't feel right, and that's essentially from the fibres breaking down under chemical attack. This is, again, sulfuric acid, a contamination. So this brings us to quite a good practical point. You know, how easy is this going to be to spot? Because the person who was using this rope, they borrowed it. So it was a military person. They borrowed the rope from a work colleague, and they'd noticed the fading. But because it was an indoor wall rope primarily, they assumed it was chalk dust, and that was the reason for it being, you know, white. And you know, if we've got our own personal equipment, then we know what it looks like. We've got a benchmark, you know, so if there's a sudden change, we're probably going to pick that up when we check it over before we use it. But if you've never seen that kit before, it's actually quite a big ask sometimes to pick out there's a problem. So I'm not saying that this is something that you would necessarily be able to spot or pick up, but if you do come across it, you know, if someone's got a rope and it just looks, you know, there's obvious fading discoloration, then, you know, you probably want to at least check it out. As I said, might be tricky to spot in a busy wall, but the big giveaway on this was it just had a very odd feel about it. And when you looked at it, it was like, yeah, that bleaching out, the washing out of the colours doesn't look like it's just got a bit of chalk dust in it. So another example, I'm kind of going with the sort of the most interesting ones, I guess, or the ones that would be most interesting if they were to happen to you. So this is a black diamond harness. Now I can't recall if this happened in a fall or if it was lowering off. I think it might have been from a very small fall, you know, but a typical almost slumping on the rope on a route, again at a climbing wall. And so this was sent in to me by the duty manager of the wall, and you know, you can see the leg loop there is completely failed. I imagine that was pretty scary for the person using the harness. You know, really unnerving thing to happen. So what's going on here? Well, I'm beating the same drum. Big giveaway there. If you can see that staining, that sort of bleaching of the webbing on the inside of the padding on the leg loop. And it's actually fairly simple to test for the presence of sulfuric acid. You can just sort of like, you know, take a swab with some water, get some of the contaminant into the water, and then do a test that shows that test for the presence of sulfuric acid. So this came up positive. So again, sulfuric acid, bleaching of the fabric. If that was on the inside of the leg loop, I think you'd be doing really well to spot that, but you might get some staining on the outside. So, you know, you might spot that. People always ask, well, you know, where's this sulfuric acid come from? It's actually a very, very common industrial chemical. So, you know, in the sort of times of industrial revolution and all that kind of thing, you could essentially use a country's output, its manufacturing output of sulfuric acid, as a pretty good indicator of the sort of size of its economy, because it's just used in so many processes and so on. These days, you're most likely to come across it in fairly, well, you know, pretty aggressive cleaning products. So drain unblocker, oven cleaner, that kind of thing. And the other thing that's always a given is if you ever ask somebody whose kit has had this happen to it, they will never be able to tell you where they think it was contaminated. Which, if you think about it, stands to reason. If you thought your kit was contaminated with sulfuric acid, you definitely wouldn't use it. You don't need to be a chemist to know that, you know, sulfuric acid is pretty powerful reagent, and it's not going to be a good thing to sort of have on your PPE. So people tend to never really know where it came from, and the big suspicion is it's a fairly persistent chemical. So, you know, if you spill it on the garage floor, it may just be sitting there for quite a long time. You know, it doesn't go off. And yeah, you put your kit bag down, that could be an issue. The other, you know, the traditional story is an old battery kept in the boot of a car, an old car battery, but I don't think batteries are generally sealed units now. So it's usually some sort of cleaning product that's the issue. So yeah, if you can spot something like that, you know, I think you've done pretty well considering the environment you're working in. But if you do spot something, you know, this is really must have a word. You know, stop them using it, I think, until you can find out a bit more. Any sort of staining like that. So these are, again, you know, I've come up with a few examples, but this is thankfully pretty rare for it to happen. So much more common, almost certain really, is general wear and tear leading to abrasion damage. So this is a harness tie-in point. So this is one of the sort of alpine center type harnesses with a loop that comes up. So a single tie-in loop. And this is obviously maybe a little bit easier to spot. You've got the color change between the two components. So what would you say if you're one of your customers, their harness looked like this? So, well, if you think about it, this harness is still safe to use. The yellow webbing is the reinforcement around the tie-in point, which modern harnesses have, and that's the sacrificial element. So it performs the same function as the sheath on a rope, and that's there to, you know, just get worn away. It's done its job. So that harness, you know, on that amount of wear there is still safe to use, but the clock is ticking because the black load-bearing tie-in point is now exposed. That's going to start taking some abrasion and start weakening. So again, you know, you might be saying to your customer, maybe when next time you come in, consider having a new harness because that one's, you know, that one's worn out now. So I've got some more abrasion here. I've got a feeling this is the same harness that was in one of Mark's slides, because this is, I might have sneakily borrowed this from my time at Lion. what about this? Just general fuzziness of the webbing. You know, nothing too bad, perhaps, you might think. Well, the issue here is you've got the continuous wear of the webbing, so across its whole width and down its whole length. And as Mark pointed out in his session, the load-bearing strands, which are running sort of like from left to right lengthways, at some point they are repeatedly exposed to the surface. So if you've got abrasion all the way across, all of those strands on that webbing are, you know, have the potential, the likelihood of being compromised, damaged in some way. So I don't think we tested this harness, but if you want to know where it came from, it's from a Go Ape center. So that abrasion is simply from being put on and taken off and adjusted over and over again. I think it was a 3-year-old harness. And they also jump off and abrade the webbing that's going through the buckles a little bit each time, you know, when they do their death slide thing. So it's actually quite similar use environment, I'd say, to a really intensively used hire harness or group harness if you're a wall that does a lot of group sessions. And yeah, this is an immediate stop using that immediately, because as Mark pointed out, you know, that could have lost 20% of its strength, could have lost 80% of its strength. You know, so you're definitely getting down to, you know, if it lost 80% of its strength, you're really pushing the limit on whether something is going to fail or not in normal use. So sometimes the things which are less obvious, you know, it just looks a little bit worn, doesn't it? Sometimes they're the most lethal. So this is I think this is a really good talking point, this one. This came in just by chance. I saw a Facebook thread and saw some pictures, and there was an interesting discussion on there. You know, various people. So this came in from Brooks Climbing in Oxford. So yeah, thanks for the folks there for letting me use this picture. Came in quite handy. So I've been climbing for about the same time as Mark, just at a lower level, so about 30 years. And when I started climbing, this was the harness that you wanted to get. You know, it's sort of like pitched at, you know, sort of people who want to be alpinists and all that kind of thing. A good all round harness, basically, for climbing, mountaineering and stuff. So it's a troll harness. I don't know if they're still around, certainly not in their original form, but yeah, Troll used to be one of the major harness manufacturers based in the UK. So it's a 30-year-old at least design. Now, part of that discussion on that Facebook group was, well, it's not dangerous just because of its age alone. And that may be a fair point, but yes, this is really going against the manufacturer's lifetime. And I think this is a really good example of what we mentioned before about lemon theory, where it's not one thing that's going to necessarily give you the problem. It's lots of little things stacking up. So in this case, again, got to think about the user. The user of this was not, you know, it wasn't an old veteran bringing their old harness in, which they'd used for years and which they knew how to use, and they knew that they were maybe pushing it a little bit, but it was still in good condition. This person bought this harness secondhand. This harness predates there being standards, CE marks and EN standards. So one of the things that you get on harnesses these days is you know, full user instructions, like a tag on the harness to refer to. I mean, a 30-year-old harness, you probably couldn't read that. But the user didn't have access to the user instructions for the harness, so they didn't know how to do the buckles up, and that could be a real killer. So with this, it's probably more the fact that it's a second-hand harness and that the user didn't know how to use it that is the danger. But you know, that's all part and parcel of its age. You know, if you Google this, looked up the manufacturer's instructions, if you wanted to find out, you probably wouldn't find anything because it predates the internet. That's how old this harness is. So the decision you're going to have to make is, if you spot something, you know, that's really old, you know, how are you going to engage with your customer and persuade them maybe to not use it? So in this case, if you think about the more usual thing, which is where you have an experienced climber and they think, you know, I'm really experienced, I've been climbing for 30 years, my harness is fine. How are you going to persuade them to replace it? And, you know, that's where your soft skills come in. You might say, well, look, you know, you're a regular, you're an experienced user of the centre. Lots of the younger climbers here look up to you because they know, you know, what you've done and achieved. It's not really setting a good example to them, is it? You know, if they don't have the experience that you have to make those decisions, maybe you should be a better role model. You know, there's all sorts of arguments that you could pitch at them. Or you could just say, look, it's 30 years old, I'm not having it in my centre. That's for you to determine, really, but there's a good example for how things can sort of stack up and how the user is as important as the equipment. Who's using it? How much do they know? How have they made the decision to bring that kit in? Okay, take a pause. Okay, right, so our next grouping of stuff is uncertified or counterfeit equipment. So we've got counterfeit equipment, fakes basically. You know, somebody has attempted to copy a legitimate branded product. Now, fake or counterfeit kit, by its very nature, is going to be really hard to spot because it's trying to pass itself off as something else. Now, the good news is I'm not aware of anything or very little in recent years that's going to be relevant to indoor climbing. So the sort of stuff I have seen, things like crampons, that sort of stuff. And I think the way things have moved, it's obviously a massive issue. You know, someone like Petzl, if you copy their stuff, they're going to come at you with, you know, all the resources they can. And essentially what's happening now is that manufacturers, instead of trying to counterfeit equipment, they've realized that they can quite easily just sell their own branded kit online that isn't certified, and then they don't need to try and pass it off as another manufacturer's equipment. So I would argue that fake or counterfeit kit is less of an issue. You're probably not going to spot it unless you're really eagle-eyed. But what about uncertified kit? Well, maybe it's worth talking about why certification is important. So if you go back in history, the BMC Technical Committee, which I'm the secretary for, been around for at least 50 years. And when that group was set up, their primary job was investigating equipment failure. So the only standards were the UIA safety label, and that was not mandatory. So you could, you know, pretty much guarantee if you had a UIA safety label, it would probably work as intended. But anything else, you know, not necessarily any quality control stuff, you know, things broke, carabiners occasionally broke, you know, crampons broke, harness buckles would sometimes come undone, you know, be a whole range of things going wrong. And things massively changed in the mid-90s when the CE mark came in and the European, the EN standards came in. So certification, you know, has made a huge difference to the safety of climbers. There's no question about that. And as a result, you know, BMC Technical Committee now, our role is completely different. It's more about giving people advice. You know, you almost never need to check, do an analysis on failed equipment. It doesn't happen as often. And as Mark mentioned, one of the other things you'll get with certification, as well as being made to a minimum standard, it needs to be made within a robust quality assurance system. So you will get a recall if something goes wrong, or, you know, please inspect your equipment. So that's why certification is important. So the problem is that now there's a whole deluge, I think is a fair word, of uncertified kit that you can buy really easily through the sort of, you know, generic online portals. So this is Amazon's choice. I'd like to give this to Jeff Bezos to climb on, see what he thinks of it. No, but, you know, so this is, you know, Amazon's choice, professional climbing rope. Now, as experienced climbers, we can all look at that and, you know, chuckle a little bit and say, yeah, that is not a climbing rope. I'm not going to go near that. But, you know, what if you're buying for somebody else? Grandparents buying for a, you know, grandchild has just started climbing. You know, there's potential issues there. So this is made from a high quality polyester material, very strong and durable. Well, you can't make a climbing rope from polyester. It doesn't have the necessary properties to do that. So we like, you know, the previous rope was fairly easy to spot, but what about this? What if someone brought this in? Would you spot it? So this is a Udar brand. Apparently it's CE marked. You know, a bit of a giveaway. Some of the language here: maximum braking force 14 kilonewtons. Well, you know, for a climbing rope, we're not really interested how strong it is. We're interested in its dynamic properties. You know, what impact force there is, how, you know, what its elasticity is, that kind of thing. This is going to be a little bit harder to spot. So how would you spot this? Well, I mean, your best bet would be the end markings on the rope. This, you know, this wouldn't have the correct end markings on it. If you're looking at a harness, you'd probably be looking at the labels. Carabiners and belay devices will be marked on the body. So what are we going to look out for? So you're going to be looking at markings, but I think first of all, again, bearing in mind you're in a, you know, probably working in a busy wall, there's a lot going on. Does the kit look right? You know, you might stand out looking a little bit odd, a little bit different. Have you seen it before? Do you recognize the brand name? So those are going to be, I think, your first sort of primary sort of alerting features. And only then, once you've gone over, you know, for your amber level discussion, try and find out a bit more. You know, where did you get it from? You know, that kind of thing. You might start thinking, is it okay if I have a check of this and just look, check the numbers on it? So we've got again, you know, this is sort of the same as from Mark's presentation, which you covered. But yeah, you've got the CE mark, UKCA mark, UKCA will be coming from the end of the year. You've got the notified body number, so the 0123 in this case. And then if there is a specific standard for the product, that'll be marked on there as well. So yeah, this is for a mountaineering harness, a climbing sit harness, EN 12277, and the latest version update on that is 2015, I think. That's the sort of thing you're looking for. So let's see about some of our examples. So lighting climbing harness, protective waist safety harness. I mean, it looks, you know, it's not that dissimilar to what you might see out there that's legitimate. But if you did think, oh, I've not seen that before, let's go and check it out. Okay, don't recognize the brand name. Let's have a look at the label. So here's a close-up of the label that comes with this harness. So it's got a CE mark on it. Oh, okay. What about the rest of it? Well, description of a safety harness. I don't think there's a standard or anything like that for a safety harness. What we deal with, you know, climbing walls, and that I would go and buy for myself is a mountaineering harness. What about the standard number? Well, if you look at the standard number, they've mixed up the CE bit and the EN bit and sort of amalgamated them together. So it's got CE 361 2002. So it's kind of a little bit mangled together. So that, to me, would say that's dodgy. There's something not right about it. You could do a little bit more digging to try and look them up. So here's another example. So the label on this says C1282, and then it's got a whole load of EN standards. So EN3, you might not be able to see this very well, but you know, this harness apparently conforms to everything. EN353, EN358, EN361, and EN362. Well, none of those are standards for a mountaineering sit harness. And if you look up the CE number, remember that 1282 should be the number of the notified body, so the people that the manufacturer send the harness off for its independent type approval. And so I did look them up. So they are a notified body, but they don't cover PPE for, you know, mountaineering equipment, falls from height, and so on. So they do medical devices, machinery, lifts, and so on. So that is a fake label, and it's not certified. So before you make the assumption that all kit that comes from China or you can buy on Amazon is, you know, uncertified, then just be aware that things are slowly changing. So if you look at this, again, a brand you may not have heard of, Zinda, a lot of the language is the same as the uncertified kit, you know, so it's for rock climbing, hammocks, and so on. But this actually is certified, and there's the certificate. So this is, it's got a UIA safety label. Is legitimate. So the UIA have been taking great strides to sort of try and get Chinese manufacturers on board and start certifying their kit. So that is actually certified. You can look that up on the UIA. Anything that's got a UIA safety label, you can look up on their website. So that's pretty handy. So really, you know, this whole issue of uncertified kit, it has been getting worse and worse. You kind of hear on the grapevine from various climbing wall managers and employees that they're seeing more and more instructors working in centres and so on, tech advisors. And really, you know, it's a difficult one because how do you reach those people? They're generally starting out in the sport. They're the ones most at risk. And really, you know, you as people working climbing walls, you're probably exposed to those people more than anyone else in the industry. So you're probably the best people to engage with them and stop them from having a nasty accident. To give you an idea about some of the test results of some of the kit, some of it is actually okay, it passes, but again, remember, there's no guarantee of it being produced inside a proper QA system. So if there was a manufacturing fault, would they get hold of their customers to tell them to stop using the kit? I doubt it. And a lot of it, particularly the ropes, is just absolutely lethal. So yeah, quite an ongoing issue. So right, our next sort of grouping, sort of badly fitted or poorly chosen kit, and this is again coming into the sort of the meat and drink really of the behavioural stuff. People, you know, it may be safe, it may be climbing equipment, but are they using it properly? Is it compatible with the other PPE they've got? That sort of thing. So, real obvious one, Someone's got a harness, it's perfectly okay harness, but it either doesn't fit them or they haven't fitted it properly. You know, you could, if you fell upside down, you could invert and slip out of that harness because it's not above the waist and the leg loops aren't properly adjusted. So that's much better. That's the sort of thing you want to see. You know, yeah, maybe they've borrowed a harness and it just doesn't fit them. What are you going to do? Are you going to offer them one of your higher harnesses? You know, that's a judgment for you to make. A few other examples. Well, you know, some belay devices, they need a dedicated belay crab. So if someone's got a climbing technology click up, you know, that should be used with a specific carabiner. Are you going to spot that across a busy climbing wall? Probably not. But what you might notice is somebody's having difficulty with their belaying. The belay device doesn't seem to be working for them. And that might be your cue to go over and just have a chat, and then you might find out that's the cause. You know, you haven't got the right profile on the shape of the carabiner for that belay device. Another really good one. What if you've got a small child? They're using a sit harness and not a child's full body one. Now that's something you might ideally pick up on when they're coming into the centre. You know, you spot a very young customer, you know, with their parent or guardian, maybe finding out what kit that is going to be used with them, you know, because they need something fairly specific that's going to work for them. You know, if you do go over because you think, well, I'm a bit worried about that child slipping out of their harness, you know, you're going to have to be really tactful. It's going to use a lot of your soft skills, because, you know, you can have a parent or guardian that, you know, someone's basically telling them that they're not taking proper care of their young charge, and you've also got the child to consider. You know, how's the child going to feel if someone comes over and tells them that the adult that they're trusting is not looking after them properly? So it's not an easy one to deal with, and hopefully you can deal with it before they start climbing. But, you know, that's the sort of thing you maybe have to think about. I mean, another one, I'd probably things like, you know, compatibility. Has someone got a belay device that's appropriate for their rope? And again, this is something you might find out if you notice somebody struggling when lowering. You find out they've got, you know, maybe an older belay device. It might be quite worn, and a new slick skinny rope, and that's why they're having an issue. You might be able to help them out with that. So we've got non-climbing equipment. So here really we're talking about PPE that isn't intended for climbing and mountaineering. You know, is it suitable? So here's an example. So this is a Petzl rope access sit harness. Is it safe? Well, it may be. I'm a climber. I'm not a rope access professional. You know, how am I going to know how to use this safely? Do you want people bringing the incorrect tool into your centre? You know, incorrect for the job. It's not. This harness isn't designed or tested for use for climbing. Where would you tie in? How would you check that the customer's tied into the right point? So I think it's reasonable to expect your customers to bring stuff in that's actually designed and intended for climbing. So this is a pretty good example that came up. This came throughout the BMC's incident near-miss reporting system, which is like a peer system where peers, you know, you can just report either things that happened to you or you've witnessed where someone's had a near-miss, indoors or out. So this came from a customer at a wall who saw somebody using a device that they didn't recognise, and the person was using it in a strange, you might call it suspicious way. So they sort of alerted the duty manager, and there was a conversation. So I'd never heard of this device. I had to look it up. You know, you can't always be the expert. You know, there's so much new kit out there. but it took me about a minute to look this up and find out how it should be used. So yes, it is a rope access descender and rescue tool, but it is also certified as a belay device. If you look at if you can see the writing along the bottom, third from the right, where it says CE and then EN 15151 Part 1. So that's the assisted braking device, part of the belay device standard. So it's the same category of device as a Petzl Grigri. And so is it appropriate for someone to be using this? Well, yes, it's certified as a belay device. But two concerns here. One, the minimum rope diameter for this is 9.9 millimeters. There's a lot of ropes that are thinner than that now. So the person could come into difficulty unless they're really knowledgeable about this device and what its capabilities are, and knowing about that minimum rope diameter. And I believe the person using it had been given this by somebody and they didn't really know how to use it properly. So the user was actually braking using the lever and taking the hand off the rope, so taking the brake hand off the rope. You know, I'm familiar with the device, so again, if I'd been in the position of working at that wall, I wouldn't have come across this device before. I couldn't claim to be an expert on it, but it did take me about a minute when I read this report to look the device up. This is from the user instructions, arresting a fall, and it's quite clear that you, like all belay devices, that you don't take your hand off the brake rope. I think it would be pretty big news in the industry if such a device came onto the market. So, fair to say. So there's no hands-free belay devices. So again, you know, you can't be an expert, but you can find things out. So the last category of kit we've got is recalled equipment. So recalls are actually quite rare now, full recalls, and they tend to be like a limited recall. Manufacturers now, because of the QA quality assurance systems they have, and the fact that everything's batch coded and marked up, and then because of the sort of process control they have, tend to have, if there's an issue, it will be check your device. If it's between these two serial numbers, have a look and see if it's got this, X issue with it. And if you do, send it back and you'll get a replacement. So it's rare to have a full, pull everything back in kind of thing. If you want to find out about recalls, stuff that's out there, then there's obviously the manufacturers put warnings out, but there's a UIA recall page. So anything with a UIA safety label goes onto their recalls database, and people like the ABC and ourselves, the BMC, will put announcements out, and stuff will get distributed to individual walls. So yeah, you can help your customers avoid any nasty surprises. So here's a recent example. So this is a recall for inspection of the Baal Birdie, handle with a problem, and there's some advice in there of how to check and see whether you need to stop using your device. So from a customer's perspective, sometimes the news doesn't always get through, but if you're sort of clued up about what's going on out there in the industry, you might be able to go over and have a chat with your customer, just double check that their device or item of kit, they are aware there's been a recall, and I think they're going to be really, really pleased that you've had that engagement and interaction with them. So I'm just going to finish off, actually fairly close to time, which is good, with just a brief summary. So yeah, I've worked in a busy wall, floor walking. I know it's probably one of the hardest jobs I've ever done. It's tough. There's a lot going on, and yeah, in summary, you know, intervention, it may be a benefit to your customers. It may help them to stay safe and enjoy the visit, but it needs to be appropriate and duly considered. Remember, the behavioural stuff is going to be much more important than equipment, you know, worrying about equipment failure. You need to be knowledgeable and credible. It's better to say, you know, look, I'm not sure about your harness, you know, can we just have a chat about it, and you know, be clear that you're not an expert, never make stuff up. I think that makes you more credible. Say, look, I'm just a bit worried, you know, can we find out a bit more about it? How old is it? That sort of thing. But if you are going to give them information and help them out, so for example, hey, did you know there's a recall on that? If you're informative, if you what you give them is informative, then you know the best case scenario, I think, which you probably agree, is where you empower your customers to make better future choices for themselves. You know, and the end result there is less interventions for you if you're floor walking, desk staff, and so on. If your customers are upskilled. So that is the end of 3 minutes early. Waffled on for long enough, though. I think that's the end of my presentation. So I'll stop sharing now.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dan. Excellent. Thank you very much, Dan. That was excellent. Really good information there. Lots to think about for floor walkers. Some good questions already coming in here. I'm hoping everybody else, again, furiously typing, getting me some questions in. Could I ask all of our other panelists and guests to join us back? Jono, Kate, Mark, and I think I definitely saw Scott's face earlier. There he is. Scott decided to join us halfway through there for just a quick second. Cool. So thank you very much, Dan. I hope you guys all enjoyed Dan's presentation. Lots of really good information here. We'll start going through some of the questions that have been coming in. There's been some really good ones. But there was actually a question that came in this morning's one that I kind of left till just now, just because it's quite relevant to what Dan's just spoken about. And I think it's the kind of middle ground between what Mark was speaking about this morning and what Dan was speaking about. So the question was around responsibility and I'm assuming liability. How responsible are the employers for the PPE that staff provide themselves? So, you know, a lot of staff in climb walls, they might choose to wear their own harness for things. You know, they might be going to test stuff, get stuff, route set, or they might be running groups wearing their own harness or using their own belay devices and stuff. So how responsible are employers for that kit? Who wants it? Deadly silence there.
I can say something if you like.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, that if you're the owner or the duty holder of a wall, and then you have staff who you're paying to work, and by agreement you're allowed to use their own personal kit, you are ultimately responsible if they're using for work purposes. It's the same way as if I allow a member of staff at Lion to use their car for work. That car has to be roadworthy. Therefore, I'm responsible to make sure that car is roadworthy. A harness, a rope, whatever it might be, they have to be fit for purpose. So if the use of that isn't fit for purpose, the owner of the wall, the duty holder, would be responsible in the case of an incident. That's my view. Kate, would you agree with me?
Yeah, I would say I have taken a pair of scissors to a staff member's harness before now. If nothing else, it brings your company into disrepute. For your staff should be ambassadors for your centre. If they're wearing harnesses that don't look right, if they're using equipment that's not fit for purpose, yes, you have a legal liability to some extent, but you also have, first of all, a moral duty as their employer to sort of make sure that they have the information they need to equip themselves properly if that's what they're doing. Secondly, there's the public perception. your staff are role models for your customers and should behave as such. So yeah, so sometimes centres will provide equipment for the staff. Often staff will bring their own equipment, but in the same way as an instructor, if you have an experienced client who's brought their own harness to a group, your responsibility is to check that harness is good for use. The same as an employer, your responsibility is to check your staff's equipment is good for use. But whether we don't include our staff's personal equipment in our logging system because it's not held on site, and whether we should or not, that's an interesting question. We don't log it. We assume that the owner of that equipment, the staff member, is inspecting and logging their own equipment. If we have a route setter, if we have a route setter come to work on site, they're contracted. We don't ask to see the inspection for their personal equipment they brought to site, should we?
I think it's a bit. I think it's a real sort of management issue sort of question, and who your staff are. If I was at a wall managing it, just per se, and I had 2 or 3 staff, and I work with them every day, you know, you can have a pretty good handle, you know, as long as you give them the right information. Look, you need to make sure your kit is fit for purpose. And I knew that they were suitably qualified, experienced and competent. I might defer that judgment to them, but that isn't going to be the same in every case. If I've got a lot of staff, maybe some staff who I maybe only see once a month, I think it's maybe going to be a different story. It is definitely one of those grey areas without a straight answer, but certainly in the outdoor instructing world, you know, for years we would just all use our own kit and there was no oversight on that. But the assumption was that because we were suitably qualified and experienced, we would be able to determine that for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, it possibly the amount of care you would take would be dependent on the experience level of your staff. So if I've got an MIA coming in to do some work, I'm going to assume that they have looked after their kit themselves. If I have an experienced route setter coming in, contracted to do work, who signed our contract to follow suitable health and safety procedures on site, I would expect them to maintain and inspect their own equipment. But if I had a young person who's arrived on site and is doing in-house training with us with no previous qualifications and limited experience, then the duty of care presumably is much higher. And I would expect to be able to look at their equipment and to advise them about how to maintain and look after it.
There was a question that came in actually on that. I don't know if this is why you're, but there's a question, Kate, do you require contractors to declare that their PPE is appropriately managed, or is it just something that you kind of expect professionals to be doing?
At the moment, we would say that would be part of what you would expect a professional to do. The route setter would carry their own insurance. They're responsible for their own qualifications. That's why they are a freelance contracted individual as opposed to a worker. I think if they're a worker, there's a different liability.
Yeah, contractors are liable to themselves. Yeah, and I think like for when we're talking about, you know, staff using their own equipment and stuff, and there was a mention there about, you know, staff being really experienced, and we kind of expect the experienced people to know what they're doing and do things appropriately. But there's a really nice note here that comfort and assumption often breeds complacency, and this is something that I talk about a lot. Is complacency is the killer, and it's people that are really experienced and all these procedures and that are on autopilot, and they get a little bit complacent with doing these things. And I would definitely question how many of the really experienced staff members do go through every bit of kit regularly that they're using and check it, their personal kit, not just their work kit. But yeah, so if you are a staff member using your own personal kit, then yes, it is your responsibility to make sure that you know, kit is safe. Yeah, and you need to be doing that no matter how experienced you are. Quick question for Dan. There was a question of what is going to happen with all of the information on the near miss reporting system. I think we discussed this last time. There's also going to be a reporting system for the ABC as well. But would you like to talk about where that information goes?
Yeah, sure.
Or maybe you can chip in with the ABC stuff.
So yeah, there's obviously two separate systems. The ABC have been working on making a more accessible and usable reporting system for walls, so for the climbing wall industry. The BMC, we set ours up. It's actually a volunteer-led project, which often the best things are. So a couple of just normal BMC members in the Southwest came to us with a project plan to do something in the same sort of vein as the Accidents in North American Mountaineering. So it's a peer system. So anyone can submit a report. We have strict criteria about what can and can't get published. So it's mainly anonymous. So you don't want people being picked out if there's been like a fatality or serious injury or something. The reports are meant to be non-judgmental, and it really is just an opportunity for the community to learn from each other. So if something happens to you, and if it's a near miss in particular, you were really lucky, and you think, I want people to know about this so they don't get in the same situation and have a bad outcome. It's perfect for that. So we've been running it for just over a year, I think a year and a half now, lose track with COVID, the COVID time tunnel, as I call it. We've got over 300 reports, which is pretty good. They're published on the BMC website. There's a web page that hosts all the reports. And then where we get traction for them is we put that out with like a little story on social media. So we pick out highlighted reports. But the great thing about it is I'm involved in the setting up and the management of it, but most of the work is done by, some volunteers. It's just something that they wanted to do. One of them had a pretty near miss in an avalanche up in Scotland and thought, I want people to learn from my mistakes. So that's where it all comes from. So it's really good. It's a community-based thing, really. And yeah, it's there for indoors or outdoors. But the key thing is it's non-judgmental. That's, because we want, as soon as you start judging people stop wanting to share what they've done. We've all made mistakes. I've been climbing for 30 years. I've nearly got the chop through being an idiot quite a few times, so there's a few things I did a few test reports. I had a few things to call on. We've all done it, so it's good to put it out there. So I hope that explains. Joke submissions, yes, maybe. Yeah, I mean, part of the system is you might not always get the learning from it that you would, as an expert, might think that's what it's all about. But we've decided to go with the system to just encourage people to submit reports without prejudice.
Yeah, so I could talk a little bit about our system. Currently, we've just developed a new accident database, which is being tested right now. That's why I wasn't on the Q&A just in the first place, on the first Q&A. Is going to be specifically for walls and wall owners, managers, duty managers to input all their accident data. The idea of it is that you'll be able to measure your wall's accident rates against the country's averages per 1,000. So for every 1,000 visit, how many accidents are you having? What are them accidents consisting of? And how your wall measures up against the average. And then you can start tracking that data live. So month by month rolling reports on your own data, so you can pull that information off. There'll be lots of different graphs on there that you can use to aggregate your data, work out where you're having most accidents. And then the ABC will publish quarterly reports to the public on, which is all anonymous, on sort of accident trends and what walls should be looking out for. And then that way, that'll help us inform when we work with people like the BMC, Mountaineering Scotland, on where we need to start focusing our areas within safety. So it can start to build our campaigns, but not only things we think we know, but things we actually know, rather than, oh, we think this might be something that's happening, but we'll actually know that these things are happening. So we'll be able to really do some make a real difference within the industry. And then obviously once that's done, we've got an incident and accident database which will follow, incident and near miss database which will follow as add-ons to the system. But the system won't be available to the public because, as Dan sort of pointed out, you probably get two very different opinions on what happened, from a trained professional, so to speak, to your personal opinion. So it will be accessible for wall operators, not individuals. Cool.
Thank you very much, guys. Never mind. Right, so next question, quite an interesting one actually. There's an instructor here that runs, I think it was outdoor sessions that we're talking about, and they're actually going through their kit just now, just looking at it while we were talking. And they asked, is it unusual that Edelrid harnesses don't have a CE or EN on the actual harness itself? The original labels did. Most, climbing wall manufacturers, when they put the labels on the kit, it has the CE and the EN number on the actual harness itself, but they've come across some Edelrid harnesses that were bought from a reputable shop that don't have the CE or EN stamp on the harness.
I would check back with the supplier and or the manufacturer on that, because I can't remember off the top of my head the requirements, but I'm pretty sure there'd be a requirement.
Certainly the the new Edelrid harnesses we sell in our shop have all got a label with those on.
Yeah, I don't think there's been any change to the requirement marking on the product. My take, this should be so, but the best course of action, back to the manufacturer or the UK agent or distributor, find out the information.
Yeah, that was my thoughts as well. Was that sounds a little odd that those numbers aren't on the actual harness itself. So I would go back to the supplier and ask the question for sure. There was a good question came in. There was a question earlier on that kind of related to this as well, but equipment that was checked before the lockdown, and all the PPE checks were done before the lockdown, maybe even back in March 2020, that hasn't been used since, hasn't seen the light of day since, hasn't been weighted at all. Does all that kit need to be checked again? Or is it okay to use that check from before?
I would say, we were talking about thorough inspections every 6 months. It needs to be checked again. You don't know what's happened to it. Well, you should know what's happened to it because you'd have been locked up. But yeah, the recommendation is at least every 6 months, unless we've got exceptional circumstances. So
yeah, I think as well as that, as well as meeting your sort of 6 monthly, requirement, whether it's used or not, you've got to think practically. If it's been sat there unlooked at, what's happened to it? Do you really want to give kit out to your customers? It could be mildewy, that rats could have got in there. We've heard all sorts of things about walls that have been mothballed, for months. They've had, issues with condensation, trying to get your centre back up to speed. There's been, a massive amount of work for lots of people, and that's included their kit. So, there could be anything going on. Rats could have gone in there, who knows, as well as really, it's not going to look good with your inspection records if there's something like a year and a half gap in there when you say you're doing it every 6 months. Yeah,
yeah, and obviously on some of the equipment that needs actually certification, like the auto lathes, that's a time thing. It doesn't matter that it's not been in use. That certificate's got an expiry date on it and you have to get it done.
Yeah, exactly. That would be my thoughts as well. Thank you to absolutely everybody that is leaving their comments in here. There's lots of people saying that the labels might be tucked away in some new harnesses and stuff, and it has been discovered that the label was hidden around the harness. So the number is there. It's good to see. Thank you for everyone diving in there with some really good advice. There was a slightly non-politically correct question. For customers that are slightly larger set, or slightly larger customers, where our normal sit harnesses can't sit as high as we'd normally like them above their waists. The concern is that they're very top heavy when they sit in the harness. They might flip upside down, and if the harness isn't sitting as high as we need it to, the risk of them falling out is much higher. So what would be advice around PPE for that kind of situation? I know what I would do.
I mean, at the climbing wall, if we have a customer under instruction, then clearly we have to choose an appropriate harness or harness and chest harness system. And that's what the instructors would do with someone who couldn't sit in a harness without risk of falling out of it if they were to invert. And obviously increases the risk of inversion anyway.
Yeah.
It's too low slung. But for a customer who's come in the centre, I would sort of just repeat the, you need to have somebody on your side, and if you do have to handle it with some tact. But usually a question of establishing whether the customer is aware of the risks to themselves of not being in an appropriate piece of equipment for what they're tackling. So that's, I think, a floor walking issue, and you would need to approach somebody. If you seriously thought there was a risk of them inverting or falling out of their harness, then you must approach them. No two ways about it.
Yeah.
And offer them some of your kit from the hire equipment if need be at that time.
Yeah.
But,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. The answer is not to be cutting stitching to extend the harness like Mark's worry earlier on.
No, and it is, I have to say, for, I mean, a lot of instructed groups these days, I'm sure many instructors will be nodding furiously that it is an increasing problem with young people in groups these days. You know, obviously with very young people, whether they've got a properly defined waist or not, and whether they should be in a full body or a sit to start with, it's always been a question. But we're seeing more and more larger individuals who need a full body harness or need chest harness adding to the system, because they are of a shape that makes the sit harness very difficult to fit.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, you know, simply it's quite easy for a wall just to have a chest harness that's available that would attach to it quite really easily. But the key message I think Kate pointed out there was how we approach people. Really important. They're there for a reason. They're there because they want to climb. There might be a reason why they're climbing, you know, to get fit and all that sort of stuff. We don't want to be putting these people, you know, people off.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're also very often very uncomfortable. You know, a harness, a cheap basic sit harness, you know, like a beginner's harness, will often be very uncomfortable for a larger person as well. So, and it's sometimes it's not just a question of people. You know, I think the questioner used the FAT word. We had the Newcastle Falcon rugby team in. We had to get a special set of harnesses for them. They were very, very big lads. So, you know, appropriate bits of kit for the body. Yeah. Is the answer.
Grant, thank you, Mike, for bringing this up. I was just about to come on to this. Our poll survey from earlier on. So we got 93% people responded, which is awesome. Thank you very much. 63% said yes, we should check customers' personal equipment. 38% said no. What is the panel's thoughts on this? Obviously, what is defined as a check? You know, that could vary a lot. But what is your thoughts on whether we should be checking customers' equipment or not?
I start with a very controversial one.
Ooh, we like controversy. Here we go.
To some extent, what is reasonably practicable? I think we should pay attention to customers' kit, but if the person is an experienced adult climber visiting one of my centres and I don't notice, or my floor walkers don't notice anything unusual, odd or damaged about their equipment, I wouldn't advocate that we are responsible for checking their equipment. It takes the responsibility away from that climber. And we don't want to infantilise our climbers. They have to take responsibility for their equipment. They use it outdoors, they use it indoors. I want them to take responsibility for their own equipment.
I'd echo Kate's words and also add, you can't police it because it's impossible. The reason I say this is if you're going to try and police it, it means you have to check every bit of kit they've got. So if there was to have an accident, let's say, and you checked some of their kit, but not the person that came in after them or before them, you haven't treated everybody in the same way. You're going to let your mates in that you know, and you're not going to check their kit. You're going to say, so it'd be impossible to police. And we don't want to be a police nanny state. That's just not what climbing is. So it'd be very difficult, very, very difficult to do that. You've got to remember, when people come into a wall, they sign a waiver. They sign to say that they're competent, and they do their test, or however your entry system works. There is some backup on you, but unless you see a piece of kit that looks irregular, for me, that's why, that would be my theory on it.
The majority of incidents that we see are human error, a user error, and our floor walkers' time is better spent looking for those behavioural issues. But that's not to say they shouldn't be educated, and this workshop's really useful, but that, the person doing the floor walking should be prepared to approach if they see equipment incorrectly used or looks odd, looks out of place, looks strange.
Yeah, I think my feeling is very much it's a value-added service to your customers and upskilling. You want your customers to have a good time. If their kit's fit for purpose, appropriate, that's going to help achieve that. But yeah, nobody likes, if you come over and you're sort of pestering somebody over a small thing about their kit, they're probably not going to be that impressed. So
yeah, it's quite hard these days. You've got such skinny single ropes. I mean, once upon a time when I started out 25 years ago, you could generally spot someone trying to belay with a half rope. Nowadays, you go and question whether their rope has got sufficient diameter for the device they're using to belay. And while you're at it, you might spot a little half on the end of the rope and stop them using it. But, it is harder these days. More often you spot that they're having a problem with the belaying. But the duty of care is really rests with the climbing walls, if that's where the people are starting climbing, to actually make sure they have education about what equipment they should be using in the first place. So, every clip and winch session, as we call them, is an opportunity to give some information to those people who may turn into climbers. You may see them as people just coming in to have a quick go, to have some fun, but your instructors should be starting the process of educating about what the safety chain is and how important it is to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
Every beginner's course where you're teaching them to become an individual, independent climber probably begins with somebody on a taster session somewhere. So you begin the process and you ensure by the time that person's making decisions about their equipment, they're not picking it up off Amazon.
Yeah, absolutely. Second.
Yeah, absolutely right. Can of worms, if you
spot
start
on.
going down a thorough examination route, you'd never get on the climbing wall, and the time you're spending gear. It's not your job to do that. It's your job to kind of get up a weather eye and think, oh, that doesn't look quite right, and that's where it stops. And I think you can take analogies from other like industries. If you go to a bike park, no one's inspecting the downhill bikes people are riding. You go skiing, people aren't checking your skis and bindings, are they? It's the same principle, isn't it? And so in a court of law, you'd have a pretty good defence to say, I did what was reasonably practical on the day to do what I did. If someone came in and you couldn't spot that it'd been covered in acid because on the inside of the harness, couldn't check that. So I'm comfortable with that. I think there's a level of checking from floor walkers that's just keeping a weather eye out, things that just look a little bit unusual, or someone draws your attention. Look, that guy over there, that harness looks a bit strange. You look then and approach it that way, but not thorough examinations.
Yeah, seconded.
Yeah, spot on.
So this is a common issue and a common thing that we will all have seen climbers do. We may all have done it ourselves, but let's discuss it for a second. So the end of the lead rope is the first to get damaged, stretched, fuzzy, frayed. Is it okay to shorten the rope, remove the damaged part? Of course, taking into consideration that your rope's still long enough for where you're going, obviously. But how okay is it to do, and how is it okay for, how much is it okay for climbing walls to do that for their own ropes?
Well, from a checking point of view, you need to check the whole of the rope and make sure the whole rope's okay. If there's a fuzzy bit on the end, then you cut that off. I don't see any issue with that at all.
Yeah, the main issue is making sure you mark the end of the rope so that you can identify that piece of kit.
Yeah,
especially if you're buying a reel of 300 meters of rope.
Great. Good. There's another question that came in.
Yeah, and encourage people to tie a knot on the end, because that's what will keep, that's what will do them damage.
Yeah, we have had, being a very tall wall, we have had people who've come in thinking their rope is long enough, but forgetting that they've actually chopped bits off it. So if in doubt, tie in.
Yeah, seconded. Scott, you mentioned something there that's really handy. There's another question on it. For climbing that is bought on the drum. So you've bought a big reel of rope and you're going to chop it up into each individual rope. How do you then identify it? Obviously, you haven't bought it with tags already on the end. How do you identify those individual ropes and how do you check them?
You need to tag it yourself, basically. Mark both ends, make sure that you put all of the important information on it. The numbers, the length, and the type of rope, and and make sure that's all logged. And then you create your own system for those bits of rope.
Yeah, we have a numbering system. So rather than actually trying to get the CE marks and any full information that would be on a rope as you bought it, we have an in-house labeling system on both ends. So if one does pop off, you've got one on the other end. And that's then relates to the inspection kit log, where all the full information is held.
Yeah, good system. As long as each one could be uniquely identified, that's all you do, and tie it back to the original information. That's fine, Kate. Sounds good.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of different systems. There's different shrink wrap bits of plastic that you heat and put on, or there's all kinds of bits of things that have been tried over the years. And I'm sure that's another subject that we could talk at for a great length, but
yeah,
it's got to be a system that works, that stays on the end of the rope, and allows you to identify that piece of rope.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't. I'd add to that a little bit on what Kate just said. It doesn't need to be overly complicated and complex. Yeah, keep things simple. It makes life a lot easier. What Kate just said there. She wouldn't write all the details on it. Don't try and do that on the end of a rope. Pointless.
Yeah.
Refer it back to something else.
Yeah, that should be in the management system anyway. So yeah. You just need to know that rope.
Rob's left a comment here that they mark their ropes on their location within the wall, and if the ropes don't move, then they know they've got a record of what rope that is, how old it is, and stuff. Is this okay?
Can you guarantee the rope hasn't moved?
Yeah, in theory that's okay. You've got a record of where that rope is, but if that rope moves for any reason, kids groups running around pulling top ropes down constantly, if that rope goes up on the wrong panel, you've kind of lost track of your system there, I'd say.
Yeah, our ropes, it doesn't matter how much we ask people not to move them, they get moved.
Oh yeah.
I think it's going to depend on your particular wall, isn't it, and how busy it is.
Yeah.
How your ratio of supervised to unsupervised groups and all sorts of things. It might work for you, but it's a risk.
Yeah. There's a good question. Recommendations for log books or online logging systems. Obviously, there's loads of variations out there. Everybody kind of has their own, but is there any that you would recommend?
We're talking about the management system for logging equipment.
Yes.
Yeah. We're actually in the middle of a review on ours. We've been using a product called Paper Trail or KitLog, which has got features we don't need, and we struggle because what we want is a system that is very easy to use, that allows the staff doing the inspections to input the data, but allows the manager to be told when there's a problem, to make sure that there's a link between inspection and action and decision making. And that seems to be where some systems break down. You can have somebody putting all the information in and doing all their inspections, but if they haven't been given the authority to make a decision to buy new or change, or when is it going to the competent person, and then when, from a commercial point of view, is the decision being made to actually take kit out of use or change things. So we're actually looking at redesigning our own in-house spreadsheet system just based off Excel, giving a traffic light front page that I can clock into at any time and see exactly what's going on, so that we link from a record that the day-to-day staff are looking after, but that the manager of a centre can have a weekly check on and have stuff flagged at them, really important decision-making stuff getting flagged at them before that quick draw that's been on the wall being described as fluffy for 3 quarterly inspections finally breaks, which I believe happened at a wall one time. So not one of ours.
Yeah, I think a lot of the commercially available inspection software systems try to be everything for all people, and that's their Achilles heel. They try and do everything, but they don't do everything that you might want for a specific location. And Kate, you might want something that another climb wall might not need, for example, depending on the type of wall. So I think, you know, if you're finding that some commercial available doesn't cut the mustard for you, then Excel is a pretty powerful tool. You can do a phenomenal amount in Excel. It kind of works for me, and you can share it, of course. So developing your own is quite healthy, really. But I'm
pleased to hear that.
Yeah, I'm not knocking the commercial. We use Paper Trail here. We've got a phenomenal amount of kit in our training area, and we use Paper Trail. But I know where you're coming from with your comments. I think it's good. I think a lot of other good products out there. But sometimes I often think, yeah, a bit of Excel spreadsheet, we can do a lot with that, to be perfectly honest, and get exactly what you want for the purpose of how you run your walls. So yeah, there's a market for something there, but I think the problem is writing that would fit everybody's needs. So doing your own thing, if you feel inspired, get on and do it is what I'd say. If you're good at Excel, you can do it.
Yeah, we're actually looking at returning to a system where the initial records actually appear on paper. You know, the whole question of having our staff wandering around with an iPad logging things, and then they lose the Wi-Fi and then it doesn't get downloaded. It's just like, can't we just have the initial inspection is on a piece of paper, and then that gets uplifted into the reporting system, so that I can see a digital copy of what's going on, and then you can ask anybody to go out and do that logging, as long as they've been trained how to actually inspect the equipment. They don't need to know how to upload that into your software. And that's how you gatekeep your software.
Here's a question that I guarantee we've all been asked at some point, and it's really good for customers to know. It's really good for Climb Wall staff to know, so they can also advise customers when you inevitably get asked this question. What's the panel's views on washing machines? What advice on temperature, soaps, everything? You know, what would we advise against? What would we recommend?
I'd ask the manufacturer. I know it seems like a get out, but the best place to start, just, you know, check with the manufacturer, see what they recommend. If they don't recommend it, then don't do it.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be said for hand washing. That's my personal view. Maybe not every manufacturer's view. The problem with the washing machines, there are different types of washing machines. You know, you get your big commercial machines, and I'm not sure some gear wants to be in there. And you can get entrapment in washing machines of webbing and such like, and that can do damage which you're not aware of. And if you're using a washing machine that isn't under your own control, you don't know what's been in it before, especially if it's a commercial machine, hand washing will get a lot of things very clean using the recommended soaps or detergents. It's only the soap they're using, natural soap products. But as Mark says, go back to the manufacturer. But preferably, I think hand washing is a good way of doing it. It's sort of what I call lukewarm water. As we said earlier, cold water is the starting point, just to flush any of the dirt out. Don't take it to the car park and pressure wash it. You know, that's what we should be doing, because I've seen that done before. But yeah, not convinced by washing machines personally, but that's a personal view from me, to be honest, rather than a manufacturer's view from all the people that make gear around the world.
And the other thing as well is, if I know it takes longer, but if you've got kit that's dirty enough that you need to be washing it, it's also giving you an opportunity to actually have it in front of you for a brief period of time and to look at it. You're actually getting like a free inspection. You know, if you've got a load of carabiners, for example, that are getting a bit sticky or whatever, and you wash them, it's like, right, I know that's working again now, and now I've cleaned it. Great, that's useful information. I can put that back into service quite happily now. It's a bit of a different ball game if you like, just throwing a load of stuff. I mean, we used to do it at a centre I worked at, because we used a really, really disgusting quarry up in North Yorkshire, and the ropes, you know, you'd come in, the ropes were thick with mud and gums, particularly the rigging ropes. And it was actually practically one of the only ways you could get the ropes clean. But we used to go through rigging ropes every 2 to 3 months. You know, the washing machine was not that kind on the ropes, and it wasn't that kind on the washing machine either. So it was a very niche use, I think, for that specific workplace. I'm not sure a climbing wall you need to use a washing machine. It seems a bit extreme.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of outdoor work, so we don't have a washing machine, but I certainly would be very wary. One of the things, just while we're on washing and wet stuff and harnesses, and that is just to point out, which I'm sure everyone's well aware of, is the importance of keeping your climbing equipment and PPE equipment away from your hole washing chemicals, which are acid based. So
yeah,
would do a lot of damage, I suspect.
Yeah, the dishwasher that you put your holds in to clean them, keep your ropes out of it.
No, and the room where you've got all your wet buckets with your benky in, do not let your harnesses anywhere near them.
A couple of good quick questions on marking kit. So marking metalwork with nail varnish, is this likely to react with the metal?
Possible. Bit of a fence, that one, wasn't it? No, I'd be a bit nervous. In theory, it shouldn't, but you don't know. And of course, a lot of metal products have plastic components as well, don't they? Yeah, I'd be a bit wary with nail varnish, to be perfectly honest, because of some of the solvents things that are in them. You know, be wary. I would. Again, Mark's slopey shoulder question, we called it. That's the manufacturer, but I think I'd be wary if I saw a lot of kit with nail varnish, and I'd be saying, really, is that a good idea? I'd avoid it on metal items if you could.
Yeah, I personally know a lot of climbers that have, you know, put their own marks on their gear with either tape, but a lot of them have nail varnish because it comes off less than tape does.
True, yes.
Around a lot longer. So yeah, again, like you said, it might be the get out answer, but check with the manufacturer because you don't know.
Imagine there's a better alternative out there would be my answer.
Tough tags. Not plugging someone else's company here.
Yeah, you on commission. You on commission.
Can't beat tough tags, man. Also, can you engrave metalwork? I've seen a lot of I've seen outdoor centres engraving little marks, little numbers on their metalwork as well.
I'll tip on that, right? Products can be engraved if you know what you're doing. Again, the manufacturer have to approve the engraving, because depending on how deeply you start to engrave the product can cause issues. So with absolute caution, with the manufacturer approval, they may want to train you and approve you in doing it. As soon as you engrave a product, you will start to cut through any of the protective surface that's put on it. So it's anodizing or it's sheridizing, whatever it might be, you will start to work through that. And that will start to reduce the lifetime of the product, especially if used in outdoor environments. So corrosion becomes a problem. So engraving, yeah, be very careful. The other thing that I've seen people do is using a stamp set where you hit the stamp with a hammer to put a mark on it. That should be avoided at all times, because you will damage the product without a shadow of a doubt, no matter what it is. So yeah, we will engrave here at Lion under the instruction of PETS, for example. They allow us to do it for some of our offshore rope access companies, but they know that the anodizing will start to fail fairly early in its life. But if they choose to do it, we've tested the product to make sure there's no adverse effect. Yes, there is an adverse effect, that they will start to degrade more quickly, but they manage them appropriately. So really to avoid, if you can, is the answer, I think, from my perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. There was a really interesting question came in, actually, a kind of a case study, if you will. I know it's something that I come across a lot, being, you know, an instructor that uses other climbing walls and stuff as well. If we see potential issues with people's equipment in climbing walls that climbing wall has allowed, but we still have concerns, is there any level of responsibility to us as experienced people or qualified people if we're in a centre that is not our own? The example that was given was a family in another climbing wall, and some of the kids were using just slings as a harness, and the unqualified reception staff said that it was okay. Ooh, that is a light silence right there.
It's well, it's probably the sort of thing that would end up being duly weighted in a court case, wouldn't it? Because if you're an experienced, it's about what's reasonable, and as an experienced, professional, for example, if you had determined that there was some unsafe practice going on, yes, I think you'd be duty bound to do something. But it's also the climbing wall's responsibility. So I think if you ignored it, if you saw something and you didn't say anything, it's possible you might get pulled up for that. I don't know, but I think
what you've got to go back to and say, for me, would be, Dan, I don't know how other people feel that is there immediate threat to life? First question. So if I don't do something, could somebody die? Is it safe? Yes or no? If it's no, then speak to the wall and say, I feel uncomfortable with it. Maybe you should do something about it. If it is yes, I myself probably would say something to the person just about to go and climb. If I felt it was life-threatening. That's me.
Yeah.
Oh, good point, Seth. I quite agree with you. And picking up Dan's point, there is a term used in law called guilty knowledge, where as a professional, and you are cited as being in that location when an accident took place, and you had sight of it, you had guilty knowledge and didn't do anything, you could have a citation to attend a court case. Probably it's like in a workplace, and climbing wall is a workplace, of course. I don't think there's any case history in climbing wall as far as I'm aware. There is case history in the rope access world where that has occurred, where people have not shared guilty knowledge of a potential problem about to happen. And I think there's a moral duty to say something. So Scott, quite agree with you. Yeah, if it's not going to be life-threatening instantly, I would the wall and say, look, guys, just be careful with this, will you? Just draw your attention to it. And if it is, I think you need to step in and say, I really don't feel happy with that practice. It's particularly dangerous. My view, I'm afraid, so it's not an official view, but that's the view I'd take. So I'm kind of with you, Scott, on it.
Yeah. I like to think that we all kind of, just as climbers, have a kind of duty of care to each other to make sure that we're not getting into issues and we're trying to avoid accidents. So if you see something that is obviously not right, we can go to that traffic light system. If it's not immediate danger, have a chat with the climbing wall. But if it is immediate danger, then yeah, again, I personally would have a conversation. You'd put your floor walker hat on and do it, kind of cautiously, have the conversations properly and stuff. You wouldn't just go over and shout at them and say that's wrong. But yeah, I'm the same. I personally would have a conversation.
Yeah, I'd just shout out, there's a huge number of our customers. It's not just people who work in climbing walls, just people who are experienced climbers. A lot of our customers are probably instructors or work in the ropes industry or whatever. And I know, and I totally appreciate that they will get involved if they feel there's something serious happening. And if they just feel it's something we should deal with, they'll come and tell us. And I think every wall should encourage that exchange where you are encouraging your customers to come and talk to you about anything they see that they're not comfortable with. I'm not saying that you don't want fisticuffs in the main hall, but it is, we all look after each other as a community. I think that's important.
I think what you've got to do as well is, it might well be something you just don't know anything about, like Dan was saying in his presentation. So immediately running up to them and saying something might be wrong, and just going to the wall and saying, "Oh, I've never seen that before. Is that right?" Yeah. Starting to share your knowledge as well, Yeah,
it's amazing what you can find out in a minute with Google. If you don't already know, you can't be expected to be up to date on everything, but you can find stuff out and go, yeah, actually, that's an issue. I should probably do something about that.
Yeah, I find it's really handy now as sort of 50 just to be able to go and go, oh, I haven't seen one of those. It's obviously a new piece of kit.
Yeah, I love that response. You go, oh, wow, I've not seen one of them in a long time. Yeah, it's a great reaction. So here's an interesting one. So would it be reasonable for walls to include something a little bit more specific in their membership agreement or their sign-in procedures with regards customers doing regular checks or the age of their gear and the appropriateness of using it in a climbing wall environment. This is often something that's just seen as, you know, perfunctory. You would do it after, you know, with your floor walker checks, but would it be reasonable for a climbing wall to add that into their sign-in procedures?
I think it's really tricky. You've got to be really careful, as we sort of alluded to earlier, about taking on this policing role.
Yeah.
And you certainly don't want to have to write anything. This is my perspective, just my opinion. Put something into your terms and conditions that means that you end up with some sort of oversight role, making sure that people adhere to that. You know, if you say you need to make sure you check your harness and et cetera, as a customer, are you then going to enforce that? How are you going to check that? I think from my viewpoint, I think the upskilling and informed customers is the best approach. And I really like that idea of the community looking out for each other as well. You know, that's certainly the way the BMC approach things. It's about giving people the information to make better decisions. It's not about telling people what to do. Climbing's never been about that.
Yeah.
Unless you're at work instructing and you're responsible for someone, which is a totally different scenario.
Yeah, I think, you know, our customers are responsible for their own equipment when they come in. And if we were to insist they sign to a whole load of requirements about how they choose their equipment and how they choose to inspect it, does that mean we have to then check that they've checked their equipment?
Yeah.
Yeah, seconded. Right, let's go for one final question before we wrap up for the day, guys, and let's pick something slightly more light-hearted. All of the questions that we haven't got to already, again, I will get answers to, so don't worry if I haven't asked your question. But with it being Earth Day today, happy Earth Day, everybody. How do we justify or feel about the situation when we have to bin equipment that looks or feels almost brand new? You know, equipment that we've bought that gets stashed in a cupboard but has now exceeded its lifespan, and we have to get rid of it. How do we feel about that? My personal thoughts are most of our kit can be recycled into something, you know, helmets becoming flower pots, that kind of thing. You know, as long as that kit, if it needs to be binned, if it needs to be replaced, it can't be used again. Make sure it can't be used again, chop up harnesses, whatever, but you can recycle it into other things.
There are companies out there actually that will take your old kit. I've got some details, and maybe if people want it, I can share it with them. They'll take your old kit, recycle it and turn it into something else, and you get a share of the profits. So they'll sell it and you'll get a share of what that is. So I can't remember off the top of my head what it's called, but there is that sort of stuff out there. I think it's important that we do our bit, that we as much as we can recycle. There you go. Yeah, like it is rubbish, chucking away kit, but it's got a lifespan just like anything, just like human beings, just like, you know, we've all got a lifespan as kit has. So there are companies out there that can do stuff to help recycle it, resell it, and you get a kickback from it. Especially some centres like that, you know, that are have to get rid of lots of kit on a annual or biannual basis type thing.
Yeah, there's definitely scope for. Sorry, carry on, Kate.
I was just going to say we recycle ropes a little locally. There's a number of outdoor centres that have handrails for their forest schools, so they want a rope to run through the woods. We always get them to sign a declaration that they recognise the equipment, the rope we're giving them, is not fit for any climbing or weight bearing purpose. So, you know, we make sure we have an exchange of information with the person who's getting the rope that's not being chopped into lots of little bits. And we also provide ropes to the Windermere Yacht Club. So the lovely big green buoys that everyone swims around and sails around in Windermere, they're held in place by Leighton Climbing Centre X ropes. So it's always a good use for these things, but you do need to make sure that when equipment isn't destroyed, that the person who is using it is aware of their responsibilities of what happens to that kit, and that you've had an exchange of a written agreement about what they're going to do with it.
Just before I get in trouble here, someone who someone who is also called Robert mentioned the name of this company in the question and answer. It wasn't me.
Oh,
I
we
didn't
sell
know.
them. Yeah, we sell those lovely chalk bags as well.
Yeah,
Like,
there's a few good schemes, and I know it's something that BBC were putting our access conservation team were putting a little website portal together, trying to collect all that so people just go to it and find out, where, if they wanted to set up a recycling scheme or just do it as an individual on a personal level. With respect to binning kit, when it's reached its lifetime and it's completely, safe to use, sometimes, it might be unused. My kind of response I always give to people there is, maybe you should go climbing more. You want your kit to not reach its lifetime. You want to have worn it out. You want it thrashed. You want to get your money's worth. You don't want to put too much money in Jonathan and Mark's pocket. Get your money's worth. Have that kit. It goes to the recycling centre in the Sky, and it's had a good life. It's got a good bucket list of climbing experiences or whatever. You don't want it to sit in a cupboard. It's heartbreaking. When you have to do that.
Yeah.
Just where what we're doing at Lion, where we have large, if I could say, corporate customers, the example I'll give you with the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, who when they buy harnesses, they'll buy 1,500 harnesses at a time, sometimes 2,000 harnesses, and they'll replace them all in one go. We recover them from the coast, and then we recycle all the component parts. We cut them up, we recycle them all, the metal goes off to recycling, the webbing does. Same with all our ropes. There's actually cost to doing it, but we stand that cost because we think it's important to do it. But we can only do it at the moment on very large customer basis. So Scottish Fire and Rescue, we might do it, say Coast Guard, police, and those sort of people. But we are looking at how we could do some collections or get some collections on a smaller scale from individuals, because we'd like to do it. I think it's kind of really important that it can be recycled. What we have to be careful is that if you get somebody to take it away from us to do something with it, that they don't just incinerate it, which is not what we're trying to achieve. We want to get it reused or turned to something else, which can be done. So I think the industry is going in the right direction. There's still a bit to go, but in answer to the Earth Day question, yeah, it is a bit galling in some respects, but safety is paramount. And as Dan said, we should be using the gear if we can. But I think the industry is really looking carefully at how we can get a longer life out of the product and then the life after the product had its original design use. So yeah, we're on it, but not there yet. So watch your space.
Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. Excellent. That is us wrapped up for our PPE webinar. I hope you guys all enjoyed that. I hope you got a lot of good information out of that. There was some really good bits of information coming out there. I want to say a massive thank you to our panelists and guests. Dan Middleton, Mark Croxall, very amazing presentations today, guys. That was absolutely awesome. Great information, really well presented. Thank you very much for all that. Kate, Jono, Scott, thank you very much for being here for the question and answer section. Your experience and background is very, very helpful for this kind of thing, and we very much appreciate you being here. Hopefully we'll have you guys around for another one at some point soon. Fantastic.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Thank you to the 100 odd people that joined us today. That was awesome. Thank you for all of your engagement. Keep in touch with us. Keep an eye on the social media and on the ABC websites for the next set of webinars that will be coming up at some point once we've got them all organized. So yeah, hopefully we'll see you guys soon for another one. Have a good rest of the day, guys. Take care. Have a good weekend. Happy Earth Day. We'll see you guys later on. Cheers, guys.